Good evening and welcome to the April 11th, 2016 work session of the Mayor and Council. Tonight we have two items on our agenda. Before we begin, I wanted to recognize our friend and colleague Henry Marafa, who has been battling leukemia and we're very happy to have him back this evening. Henry, did you want to say a word or two?
Yes. I'm wearing a mask tonight because the doctor said either I wear a mask or everybody out there has to wear one. So I sacrificed and I'm wearing the mask. I just got out of the doctor's office today and all my numbers are good. So I'm thankful. Thank you for all your prayers, all your well wishes, cards, and I'm looking forward to do business. So thank you.
Thank you, Henry. First item on our agenda is the Old Town Park Plaza and streetscape design concepts, and we are going to have Tom Lonergan lead us in this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everybody. Henry, nice to see you back. Glad you could join us. I know this is a project that's been near and dear to your heart for a long time. Joining me tonight are, of course, Sharon Disk, who's on our economic development team, and Steve Torgerson from AMT, who is our design consultant project manager. Very briefly, as you know, the Park Plaza is, we've had many fits and starts with it through the years. In the past, we had attempted to tie the design of this project to a development at the adjoining Fishman site. In 2014, we decided to take a different approach and decouple the design project from the Fishman site. As part of that, the Mayor and Council did authorize the establishment of the Old Town Park Plaza and Streetscape Design Ad Hoc Committee to help establish priorities and to provide guidance for this project. After meeting for several months, the Ad Hoc Committee did assist with the creation of the RFP, request for proposal for design services. We then entered into a contract with AMT in 2015. In the fall of 2015, AMT began their data collection and engineering work, and we are now up to preliminary design, which we are here to present and discuss. And with that, I will pass it on to Steve.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about the plaza. We are incredibly excited about the design. So we'll go ahead and move on.
Steve, let me
Yes.
just pause you for a sec. For those of you who are standing, we have room upstairs in our gallery where the meeting is. It is on a monitor. You can watch it, and then when either room clears out down here, we can move you down here, or when it's time to testify, we can move you down here as well. Just follow Dennis that way, and he will show you to the stairway, please. This is to all of our guests who are standing. Go ahead, Steve.
So we are all sitting just off of this page about in this location here. The site that we are looking at fronts East Diamond Avenue here and South Summit Avenue here. This is the Mark Line here, and this is the historic stop and museum. And so this is the parcel that we will be looking at. Adjacent to it is the Fishman parcel. So I just wanted to brief everyone a little bit about the goal and the vision as we develop this set of plans, and really focused on enlivening the space, creating an energized space where people can come and enjoy what's happening. Multicultural, part of placemaking. This is the center of town and a part of an identity. And ultimately, this creates an experience for all the users, both young and not so young. And so that's part of this space. So besides the existing amenities of those things, the businesses that are along the street, these are some of the amenities on the site that are currently drawing people to the space besides just showing up at the MARC station. And so we have the Bud train here, the locomotive, the caboose, and obviously the historic train stop. So currently the space is used very interestingly. And for the most part during our observations, now please note that this was during the slightly colder fall into winter months when we observed the space, but during this time period, The space is typically used both morning, noon, and night as a passway to get to the MARC station. People mostly didn't, I mean, a few people parked to walk across the street, but that's ultimately what the space is used as. And so after developing a couple of concepts, the ad hoc committee and our staff, we developed this concept that you see before you. And I'm going to walk everyone here at the meeting and at home through the site. And I'll go ahead and start here at the entry terrace. So this is the entry terrace. It's at the corner of Summit Avenue and East Diamond Avenue. And really it's kind of the main node from the streetscape coming onto the site. Then we have the main core, which we call the Fountain Plaza space. Adjacent to it here and here are the rainwater green, and this is how we're going to treat the stormwater management. Here up front we have the train alley, and this is where all of the trains are proposed to sit or currently sit. Here is the parking terrace, and I will describe in greater detail why I'm calling it a terrace and not just a parking lot, because it has more purpose and need than just to be a parking lot. This is the Fishman redevelopment site, and the shape of this building obviously is still being fleshed out, but this is some early concepts that we received from their architect. And then the retail frontage along this side here. Again, museum here and the train station. And in front of the train station, there is some space to continue to have an outdoor eatery so that there can be an indoor-outdoor relationship between the train station and the outside. So this is a cross-section cutting through the site. The site is actually relatively flat as you look at it from east to west. And so here on the far side, we have the sidewalk that's adjacent to the street. This is stormwater management. And I was just reminded, this is South Summit Avenue. Stormwater management here, place for sitting and also some shade, just because these trees won't be this big when they get put in. This is the Fountain Plaza. Some additional seating and some more shade, trees and some more green to be able to beautify the space and also treat stormwater management. We have a little bit of a walk here. What you're seeing here is a food truck, and there's a very important reason that that's shown as a food truck, and I will describe that a little bit more. This is the parking terrace. This is the new vehicular entry into the parking terrace. And then the frontage for next to the Fishman parcel. So really when we were looking at the Fountain Plaza space, we were focusing on it being multi-use and multi-purpose so that lots of different activities could happen in the space, whether it's a small group or whether it's a large group. And ultimately, we didn't want to create a gigantic space that would then be dead when nobody was there, or just a couple of people were there. But we wanted to have that flexibility to be able to introduce many things. So these are some examples from all over the place. This is a child playing in a fountain, and I'll describe in more detail of why we're calling it the Fountain Plaza here. Here is a concert, and it could be small, and I realize that you have your bandstand just right out the door here, but during certain events you may have smaller concerts there, or there may be a venue where you would want to set some smaller booths up. This is a streetscape that's in Oregon, where they actually set up temporary tables and chairs and things like that. And then also a similar situation, and they've actually fenced it off because this is a temporary beer garden. So on a weekend, they're able to fence it off, and people can go in and serve alcohol in a situation where they otherwise wouldn't be able to. And then I found this picture. This is in New York, actually, of kind of these gigantic bean bags, and this was an art installation. But things like that could happen in this space because it is very diverse. So the Fountain Plaza, we looked at a number of different locations as alternatives and opportunities. And so when we're looking at the fountain itself, we're looking at this space right here in orange. The fountain is intended to be able to be a fountain where people can interact with it and enjoy that space, but then if you need to, you can turn it off and use it for whatever else. And so it's able to make the space exciting when there's 2 people or 5 people or 30 people playing there, but it's also able to make it exciting when you say, hey, you know, we want to have a festival or an event and we need this space for tables or chairs or just for people to gather. And so that's what makes it exciting and makes it function during lots of different opportunities. Here are just some quick images of different types of paving that we may be looking at, all the way from kind of more contemporary and enlivening for an urban plaza of this type, down to the more traditional aesthetic here on the right-hand side. And just so everyone knows, in keeping with the Gaithersburg streetscape, we're proposing to put brick pavers out on the sidewalk, just so that that historic context is tied into the overall streetscape. Seating. So seating will focus on the outskirts of the plaza space in these orange areas. And we looked at a whole bunch of different seating opportunities. However, we landed on this for a number of occasions or situations or opportunities. Really, the wood creates a little bit more of a warmer environment to sit on. It doesn't tend to get hot. And in this circumstance, this space has a lot of different purposes. However, this type of seating minimizes certain types of activities that could destroy the benches. And so that's why we were looking at these types of benches. Shade. We felt that shade was incredibly important for the space. I realize that at some point these trees will grow up and the shade will be there as part of them. However, in the intermediate 15 years, we may not have as much shade. And so we looked at the design of shade, but we also looked at it as a place where we might be able to collect some sun and use it as charging stations. And even if we don't collect sun and we decide, hey, that's not in our budget, or we don't want to make the canopy have photovoltaics in it for a number of reasons, we can still wire it so that people will be able to charge their phones and other things like that in the space while they either watch their children playing in the water, or maybe they're enjoying a beverage on a special occasion in the space and can plug themselves in so that they can call their sweetheart. So that's what we were looking at here. I just wanted to point out this material here. This is actually an acrylic, and this is a bus stop, and they actually mounted the photovoltaics inside the acrylic. And that's how they're powering very similar items, such as these charger stations, and they're in many different types of urban sites.
That is really cool.
Thank you.
Which aspect?
So the
photovoltaics in the material.
So the Fountain Plaza screen, so this is a very small area, however, we feel that it's incredibly important. And the reason is because it's one of the gateways along the sidewalk. Right here in front of the old train station, or the historic train station, is the HVAC mechanical work. And so one of the opportunities that we looked at to screen it was to provide a screen, but this might be an opportunity to introduce some art into the site. For example, there's this gate that is actually part of art and part of an installation and is telling a story for this factory. And I thought, well, maybe this is a situation where we can really introduce art as part of storytelling and placemaking associated with the trains. So this is the planting for the rainwater green. And as we continue to develop this space and as we look at this space, we want to keep it simple. However, we want to make sure it's beautiful. The reason we want to keep it simple is so that it's easier to maintain. We don't want to just design a space that's for tomorrow and then we forget about it the week after, but really to focus on a space that will be sustainable, not only from a stormwater management standpoint, but also from a maintenance standpoint. And so these are some images showing what kinds of plantings we may look at for these spaces. Because the site slopes slightly down this direction, we would have these, and you'll see these little bands that run through the site. They would actually allow us to step the water down because the rain garden or a microbial retention has to be flat going across the bottom to be able to function. So the Train LA, as we looked at this space, we thought, well, isn't this a wonderful opportunity to be able to carry this idea of the train and train tracks into the space? And so we took some inspiration from the High Line in New York and their planting and how they were able to take the old train tracks and incorporate them into the site design. And so inspirational images include running train rails and tracks through the middle of this space, yet by introducing planting. So this is why we called this the parking terrace. And ultimately, we envision the parking terrace as an extension of the rest of the plaza, not just a place to park. So if you can imagine us putting up a temporary barrier here, whether it's bollards that are depressed into the pavement or some other type of temporary barrier, this space can now be used for other purposes, such as for putting in food trucks so that it could be an opportunity for people to enjoy all types of eating opportunities and spices. Or maybe it's an opportunity to put booths in on a Saturday morning for a few hours. And so we're really looking at it as an extension. So as we looked at the early concepts of the Fishman property, they're focusing on putting retail at the lower levels. And we felt that we should go ahead and carry the idea of that retail off of the sidewalk and draw people in towards the rest of the plaza. And so by realigning the front entry, we were able to buy ourselves a little bit more space, help to provide a buffer between the Fishman parcel and the plaza, and to help to increase the way people enter the rest of the site. And here's just an image of a typical frontage that we had envisioned as a possibility. And this is an image at the bottom of how we're able to introduce those trees so that they can be successful in tight spaces. I'm going to show a couple of design concepts for lighting. Our lighting consultant is wonderful at developing spaces that can be used at night. And I will say that this lighting can be toned down. You will have control over it. So, for example, if you want to run it all night long, great, not a problem. But if you're going to say, hey, 11 o'clock it's going to shut off, or 80% of it's going to shut off, or a lot of it will tone down, that can also happen. So this concept focuses on lighting the space in an artful manner that is simple and easy to maintain. These lights here are under the benches, and then this is creating a glowing canopy up on the shade structures. And these are just some inspirational images. And then this is another version of it, a little bit more uplighting up into the trees. The lighting is a little bit more subtle in the Fountain Plaza, and yet we're still providing lighting to highlight the trains. And some inspirational images. And with that, I will take any questions, thoughts, critiques. Would love to hear your input.
Well, great, Steve. Thank you so much for the presentation and for the work. Really, this is you and the committee and staff invested a lot of imagination, creativity, It's not a huge space we're talking about, and I'm really excited about it. You found some great examples of some desirable elements in public spaces around the country that we could incorporate here. I'm not sure what sort of guidance you hope to get from us this evening. Sort of like, we like it, or are you looking for specific? We want this and not this. What do you want after tonight?
Well, it's a project update for all of you. We've
Okay.
been working on it for so long. We did want to provide you and the public with a general update on it. As Steve said, this is a design concept or concepts that we'd like to see incorporated into it, which does come from staff, but largely comes from the ad hoc committee that provided guidance for the better part of a year. So we did want to bring you up to speed on that. But if there is any guidance that comes from the dais, general or specific, we're happy to hear it.
Okay. Well, thank you for the update. I'm really excited about the project. Who'd like to be next? Go ahead, Henry.
Of all the projects I've seen, this is the nicest design, and I'm very excited about it. The one thing I do like is to tie into the Fishman, because at some point in time, that's going to be very important. And, for us to be short-sighted now would be, not feasible. So I like that. The multi-purpose idea is the only way to go. One of the suggestions I would make, in Temecula, California, where you have all the light poles, they put sound boxes so they can play music. They can also make announcements. They can do all kinds of things. I saw that for the first time, and it really does work. So you may want to consider somehow incorporating some sort of a sound system throughout the lighting system. And but having the water thing for the kids, turning it off and having tables and chairs for concerts, because I foresee a lot of, Friday, Saturday night concerts, both at the pavilion and here. Where here you can have a much more variety because you can have tables and food and things like that. So I'm really excited about it. Nice job.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the recommendation.
Yeah, I'll echo everything that's been said. It's an exciting project. We've all been hopeful and eager to see it move forward, so it's really neat to see the concepts put into place, and we're waiting for the next step. I think the water feature in particular is a great way to activate this space. When you walk across the space now, and it's kind of this sort of blank slate, and in a sense, it is already an open space. I mean, you've got the brick patio, but there's nothing to activate it. And so, in particular, a water feature at the center of town in an area where we don't have something like that, where it could really be a draw, I think is a great central element. I did want to ask about the parking terrace. I think it's a great idea to have it be able to have multiple uses. In terms of the traffic flow, when it is being used as a traditional parking lot, how do you envision that happening? Is the design sufficient to be able to get the number of cars that you expect to be able to park there in and out through that one entrance and exit?
Yes, that's a great question, and we are able to get those number of cars in and out of the space. I realize that we lost this connection that comes through the site here.
Right.
To be able to make sure that the Fountain Plaza space is connected to the train station without actually having to cross over a road. But people will be able to easily make a right in and a right out of the site. Now, I'm not saying that they won't during certain times of the day be able to make a left in and a left out, but the left in and the left out will be a little bit harder during rush hour, definitely. But moving into the space as a right in and a right out, we don't see a problem whatsoever.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the couple of suggestions, this is really a beautiful plan, and I agree with Henry, it's the best thing we've seen yet. I think that the complementarity to whatever we're going to see at the Fishman site is pretty important. And if we have that nice transition, I think that'll activate that end of the building as well, so that's pretty important. The suggestion I had in terms of, and actually the water element, the fountain does activate the space. It reminds me of a park I saw in the city of Portland that had kind of that active space, much larger water elements, but this is pretty good. The parking terrace, though, couple of suggestions would be to have angle-in parking on, and perhaps only one lane of it in the center there, and then also, angle-in parking, whether in that center aisle, to more or less force the traffic to move a certain way. The other thing is that by having the trees in the center of the parking terrace also limits what you can do if you want to have that space as a large open space, as you've shown in the illustration. If you wanted to have a bandstand somewhere, the trees are going to block wherever you manage to put that. So that would be one suggestion that I would have in looking at that space again. But overall, this is pretty exciting. I hope we can go forward with it. It's a great start, and we just have to worry about that right in, right out being left in, left out as an issue later. But this is really nice.
Thank you.
Rob.
Thank you.
Steve, I just wanted to say thank you for the excellent presentation. This is actually the first time that I've had the opportunity to look at this from the dais. I've been following the project, but I've got a little laundry list of comments that I've made. I hope you'll bear with me as I speak initially on my thoughts here. I like the water feature. I like it a lot. I used to live down in Silver Spring, and the revitalization that occurred down there is centered on one street that has a water feature. And if you go from spring to summer to fall, it is highly utilized. So I think this has the potential to be exactly what Old Town needs, bringing folks down there, bringing vibrance down to the neighborhood, bringing life to the neighborhood. And of course, we've got a lot of good projects going on in the Fishman site, the Y site, bringing populations down there. And of course, we've got our older communities that'll allow them an opportunity to have something close by to walk to. I did have a concern along the lines of what Ryan was envisioning with respect to vehicle traffic. Is it wide enough to accompany or to accomplish both-way traffic at the same time? It looked rather narrow. And my worry is that a car going out might accidentally meet a car coming in if you don't have sufficient width. Plus, you're also planting trees right on a corner, which will limit visibility. So have you looked at that as to whether or not you're going to unwittingly cause accidents in that area?
Yeah, so the distance that we currently have and the radii are the correct size. And in next iteration, we can stick cars side by side to make sure that it just is showing. But this distance from here to here is sufficient. The other thing that we have to remember is that in plan view, we're looking at this tree and we're saying, oh, well, tree, could it be a pine tree or something like that? At the end of the day, we're looking at a lollipop. And as you know, since this is close to a sidewalk, it will need to be limbed up over time. And there is enough sight distance to be able to see both directions, both here and this direction, with the tree placement the way that it is. So, but it's a very good point and well taken.
Okay. And then, as I said, I love the fountain feature. The environmentalist in me wants to ask, what is the water source going to be, and how is it going to be utilized? Is it going to be one-time use disposed? Is it going to be reutilized water? If it is reutilized, how are you going to maintain its cleanliness for folks that are using it? Has that been addressed yet?
Yeah, so the process is one-time use is not an efficient use of the resource. And I know that some communities actually do one-time use. The benefit of one-time use is that you don't have to treat it. And so many agencies are saying, oh, well, the cost of water is inexpensive, let's go ahead and just run the fountain. In our neck of the woods, the cost of water isn't that inexpensive, first off. And second, I think that from a sustainability standpoint, it's probably not the best decision to use. So the water gets collected in a tank, and then it goes through filters. It goes through a UV filter, and then it will go through also a chemical filter. That's just part of the process, and the health department's going to require it anyways. We don't want to have people getting sick in the fountain. We want people to come and enjoy the space and not have to say, oh, but my kid got sick in that fountain the last time we were there, and then it's, a moot point that we spent all this time and money and effort to create a wonderful space.
Is the treatment on site?
The treatment will be on site, and we will coordinate it and make sure that we can incorporate it into the site in a manner that is acceptable and successful. It may mean that we tuck it in, even behind the screens here, because the pump system can actually be up to 150 feet away from where the fountains are actually being run. So there's places that we can tuck it in and yet are still accessible for maintenance crews to be able to switch things out as they need to.
There's a lot of nice examples of water parks. Savannah, Georgia has one. I visited when I was down there with Tony Thomas, who's a council member. And there's one in West, not Key West, and right outside of, in Florida that they did. It was one of the first ones ever built. And those are really nice parks. And they turn them off, turn them on, and they can use them for multi-purpose. And that's just exactly what you're talking about. So in case you ever need a reference, there's a couple of them there. The parking lot trees, in the middle ones, Mike had a very nice suggestion. In case we ever wanted to put a big tent up or something, you may want to rethink that. These are just minor, these are details now. They're just, just suggestions as opposed to, you may want to rethink that. But overall, this is a really nice design.
Rob, did you have more?
Oh, just two quick points. The train alley, I'm wondering if it's concerned it might be too cluttered. I mean, we've got those very nice antique train engines or cars or whatever they may be. I'm worried that it takes away from the space and takes away from the focal points of those train cars. And then I'm wondering about the charging stations. I haven't seen those before. I'm wondering what the life cycle costs of those upkeep, particularly because they'll be outside with electrical current in them near a water source.
Yeah, so the electrical current that's going through them is low voltage. Do they have a forever life? Unfortunately, nothing does, but the life cycle is something that will work for a number of years. Are they going to have to be replaced probably after 8 years? Probably so.
All right. So, go ahead.
I just had one other question, sort of piggybacking off of Rob's questions about environmental features. You've obviously done nice work incorporating stormwater management features. I'm wondering if there's been any consideration of pervious pavers at any locations within the site.
Yeah, we can look at porous pavements if we need to. We provided ample of room to be able to create the buffers and the planting to be able to treat all the stormwater management that we need to. And I am happy to look at porous pavement. The constraints associated with porous pavement are just mostly, it's not even the cost. There is cost associated with it. It's the maintenance and the upkeep after. And this may be the time to go ahead and launch into that realm, or maybe the streetscape itself is a better time to try to launch into that realm. But we can go ahead and take a look at whether or not we would need porous pavement to treat any stormwater management.
Well, it seems to me if you're already treating all of the stormwater on site, there isn't much need for the pervious pavers, so I was just curious. But
Yeah.
whenever we have an opportunity like this and we're not treating everything on site, I always want to ask about it. So.
Well, the parking terrace might be a place where you do that in spots and locations there. So we don't expect any heavy truck traffic other than food trucks. So that might be an opportunity to take a look at that. I think that's a good idea. I saw in Kansas City, I saw a downtown, basically a large community garden in which they had installed cisterns to collect rainwater to be used basically in the gardens, but they were using that water on the site completely. So there was no other water for the site other than what was taken from the cisterns that were used to collect water. So that, in addition to the bioretention, stormwater, or the other features that you're talking about here, that might be an opportunity to explore that as well. So I think the idea of reuse of or use of natural water sources and the water on site. It's a good point that you brought up. So I don't have any problem with the train alley that you. I think that it would probably. I don't know. I guess we'd have to see another rendering of it, but I don't see a clutter problem. It's down on the ground, so it's not going to block anything. So I think the idea of the tracks there is bringing a reminder of the location with the trains there as well is probably going to be okay. So, but I think we'll have to see some other renderings of that as well.
Just to, final point on what Mike just talked about, and I don't know what the health codes say, but can we just utilize rainwater in the fountain and keep reutilizing it, cleaning it? And that would be the ultimate stormwater management, is we use it for the water feature.
Well, you have to make sure you have enough rain.
Well, you'd have a alternate source of water as well.
You know, we've gone through periods of time when we had little rain, so I think you have to be careful, but I think the idea of being able to collect whatever falls from the sky is probably not a bad thing. So,
It can be done. In some respects, it's going to be collecting rainwater anyways, because as the water hits the pavement, it has to go into trench drains or some other type of void to get into the basin where the water's collected. And so in that area, it's collecting rain anyways. We have collected it for this, but you would have to have makeup water to make it actually function, especially since in the middle of the summer when we don't have as much rain and the children are having a great time and maybe their parents are having a great time alongside them, with them, which is what we're hoping, they will use up more water than we're actually able to make up. So we can look at that and to see if there's any more or additional rainwater that we could collect in the cistern.
Yeah, I mean, it'd just be a matter of perhaps angling the pavement so it's not running to the storm drains, instead it's running to the collection points for the fountains. Just something to think about.
All right, so now is the time we like to hear from the public. For anybody who'd like to speak on this, we ask that you keep your remarks no more than 3 minutes. The timer will beep and turn yellow when you have 30 seconds left. It'll beep and turn red when your time is up. We ask that you state your name. This is a work session, it's less formal. Who would like to speak on this topic? Please come on up, Kathy. Anybody else who's here to speak on this topic?
we're upstairs.
Or upstairs. If you're upstairs here to speak on this topic, please head down now.
Hello, Kathy Drusgula, 16 Walker Avenue. I've been the liaison to the committee, and I want to thank all the committee members for their hard work over quite a couple-year period to bring this forward. I think both the committee members and the design team have done a good job. I'm very happy you all are trying to make the project better, but I think you need to focus on making it actually happen. You're about to, in a few months, to approve the FY 2017 budget. I'd like to read you something from Capital Project 99-4, this project, from the 2007 budget. It says, at the Mayor and Council work session in May of 2003, a construction plan that separated the plaza and tower, remember this started with a clock tower,
Clock tower.
into individual elements was discussed and conceptually approved. The plan proposed upgrading the existing plaza in the short term and constructing the clock tower at a later date. Under the plan, the city would make contributions to this CIP through the fiscal year 2010, and an independent nonprofit fundraising corporation would be responsible for additional funding needed for the clock tower. Actual construction of the clock tower is anticipated in FY10, which implies the construction of the plaza was anticipated even before that. When this CIP project was created, my daughter was 8. She is now 25. Okay, you're almost a whole generation of people who could have used this plaza if its project had ever moved forward. Think about all the things that have happened in that time. Think about the other projects that have been approved, even ones that required getting land from the federal government, which we know is not a quick process. So please, put your effort into finding that little round button that's green and says go, and push it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy.
Kathy, I'm with you on that one.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, Mr. Tomasello. Mr. Tomasello. Jim McNulty. I'm Pembroke View Lane, and I'm a member of the Old Town Advisory Subcommittee. This particular project was the subject of my very first meeting with the committee, and I'm really pleased to see how the project has been received this evening, specifically about the water feature. I've worked in Silver Spring a long time, so that was what was in my head in thinking about how a water feature could be not just an activation, but a destination. And I think there's so many great park spaces in Gaithersburg, and I think that this water feature will set it apart, and it will drive families there. You know, their swing sets are over here behind City Hall, and there's Constitution Gardens Park now, and there's Boer Park, and all these great places. But this fountain, I think, will set it apart. And I think that's what attracted many of the members of the subcommittee at the meeting. So I'm really pleased to hear that everybody is reacting positively to that. I definitely would echo the comments of former Councilwoman Drusgola, and just saying, I know that this has been a project that has been on the back burner and looking at different options over the years, and I do think that the committees have done a really nice job in pulling something together, and I think the sooner we can get this going, the sooner that Old Town will have a destination. I think the more foot traffic we can drive to this destination, I think can only help with the economic development of the space and just changing the attitude that people may have towards Old Town. So thank you for your consideration, and I look forward to seeing this move forward in the near future.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other speakers on this topic? Lenny, come on up.
Thank you. Lenny Levy, 14 Supreme Court, and also the chairperson of the Old Town Advisory Subcommittee. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and guests tonight. As Jim said, we did see this plan at our last meeting, and we were very impressed with it. We have to remember that we have two groups that we're hoping this will attract. The people who live in and around the city, who will go, this is something different, something unusual, and we certainly would like to go visit it, and the people who are living in the Old Town area. And so they will have something, so they don't go, well, let's go down to Rockville, let's go down to Bethesda. There's something really neat in Gaithersburg, and why don't we just stay in our neighborhood and go enjoy it? And of course, as people come, people will be looking for places to shop and restaurants to eat at, and it's going to be a boon to the entire Old Town area. So we were strongly behind it. Personally, when we saw the materials and it was said that we could go with traditional or we could go with something more modern, I think to make this really unique, maybe the more modern would be called for so that people will go, this is really different and something that we really are enjoying. So basically, if you build it, we believe they will come. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker. We have anyone? Yep, come on over.
Mayor, Councilman, thank you. My name is Eric Stein. I live on 4th Thorburn Court. I'm nobody. I'm just a citizen in this town. And watching the presentation, it does sound like an awesome idea. I'm all for that. I think it'd be a great space. I've been in those kinds of things other places. Looks great. Just wanted to make sure that we're also considering whatever the cost of ownership is. You all know buying a house is not anywhere near the cost of owning a house. So some of the points that were made earlier tonight, I'm wondering if there has been any studies about what the cost is for electricity, for water, for filters, for the permitting that's going to go on for the people who use the space, all that kind of thing. We just ought to make that decision with our eyes open, that's all. Not in any way opposed to it. Just want to make sure we're making an informed decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom, I realize we're just sort of getting a project update at this point, and we haven't gotten, I don't know how far you guys have gotten in terms of the cost of ownership of the facility. Did you want to speak to that, or is it too early?
I'd say it's too early to talk to speak. It's something that's being considered throughout the process, but we are not down to details yet that we're able to address costs for any specific utility that would be used in it.
Okay.
So, it will be considered throughout.
obviously, they're
Obviously.
good points, and we would want them considered, so.
I will note the background materials talked about using LED lighting, which is going to use a fraction of the amount of electricity that would be currently used to light street lamps, for example, in that area. So
Sustainability is being considered throughout this, for sure.
Absolutely.
One thing
If we
about the-
create a destination for people to visit, then that boosts the economy, the economic prospects for this part of the city, and that contributes. So hopefully it's something that helps pay for itself in that way.
One thing to think about it is just what Mike just said. What this is going to do is attract 3 different people. The young kids on Saturdays and Sundays with the water park, and bring the mothers and so forth, leave the parking open, let them park there and let the kids play. Then we have the ability to put a pavilion up with music to attract, younger people. And then have, the plaza with food and vendors and all that for another crowd. And it will bring people to Old Town, is what we need more than anything. Cost at that point becomes relative to the people that we're attracting and what we're doing to Old Town.
Do we have any other speakers on this topic? Okay. Thank you all very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Now we will move on to our next presentation. We will invite Dennis Enslinger and Ollie Mumpower to the podium, to the table. And we will talk about the installation and potential installation and design of small cell facilities in the right-of-way.
We're also going to invite Frank up with us.
Okay.
So Mayor and Council members, before we get started with the presentation, I thought I would give a little bit of background and clarify what's being presented tonight, and make sure that the public is aware kind of how the mayor and city council work sessions operate, because they're a little bit different than the formal meetings that we have. Again, work sessions are really the opportunity to present information and also to get feedback on that information that's presented. There's actually no formal votes taken at work sessions, and that's a key component. Tonight we'll be presenting ideas and recommendations which deal specifically with potential location design criteria for small cell facilities. While the presentation did contain or does contain examples of how these concepts could work in 3 areas, the Rio Commercial District area, Wesley, and Washingtonian Woods, the city is not approving any specific designs at this meeting or any specific locations. Any location or design criteria that is developed as a result of this meeting and future meetings would apply to all areas of the city and are not specific to the areas identified in the meeting tonight. One of the reasons I'm often asked during preparation for this meeting is why were the areas that we used tonight as a demonstration selected. And really that is a result of working with Crown Castle, who is one of the companies that's interested in installing small cell facilities. They indicated early on these 3 areas would be one area that would be covered by an application, and it could be probably one of their first applications. So we used those areas to make sure that everybody had a clear understanding of what we were actually looking at with regard to these facilities. That included kind of looking at the density. So how many facilities are we actually looking at in these neighborhoods? The types of locations that might be considered possible designs. We felt this was really important that we could show examples in context that are really Gaithersburg examples. We can all go on the internet and look at examples that we can look across the nation for these type of facilities. It's not a new type of facility, but we wanted to try to get down to something that would actually take place here or could take place here. So everybody really had a good perspective of what was possible or what could be possible. And again, just to reiterate, we're not really approving any of these specific designs at this meeting, nor those locations. So with that, I'll get started and kind of give you an idea of how we got to this point with regard. And to note, staff's been working on this issue for almost over a year with regard to small cells. And part of that has come about because of new federal regulations that recently were in place in April of 2015. We did adopt a number of new ordinance provisions in our telecommunications ordinance to better prepare ourselves for those regulations, and those were adopted in July of 2015. A lot of the information that we'll talk about tonight, or some of the information, was actually incorporated into the new aspects of our ordinance provisions. One of those was trying to have the foresight to include provisions where the council could review these types of requests, at least initially, and set some standard for these types of facilities. Many communities have not done that and haven't been prepared when they've been having to address specific applications. So what are small cell facilities? Really, they're small microcellular optical repeater equipment and are used to provide really faster data coverage and capacity for mobile phone and device users. I think one of the things you'll see overall throughout the nation is that we all own more than one device, and many of those devices rely on cell coverage, not really for the phone call aspect, but for the data aspect. And then again, small cell antenna installations are expected to rise dramatically, and many cities and counties in the area are seeing requests by companies for such installations. This is kind of some example of not local examples. I will note that Montgomery County actually has a group of staff that meets on a regular basis to look at these applications. At their March meeting, they actually considered 8 structures that were similar in terms of new tower constructions or small cell facilities, just on the other side of Highway 28 in the DeFeef kind of school area, which I believe is DeFeef and also part of West Lehigh in the county. There were 8 actually facilities similar to what we're talking about tonight that were considered at that meeting. And with that, I'll let Frank kind of talk about some of the key elements of the federal regulations that deal with this, which can be quite extensive.
Some can be. This is just going to be a broad overview of some of the parameters and the potential restrictions that may apply. Now, there are actually, I will give you a little bit of background, there are actually 4 key laws that apply. The first is the 1996 Telecommunications Act. Sometimes see that referred to simply as Section 332 C7. I guess you get into a lot of very specifics, but that is how it is generally referred to. That is where these 5 elements primarily come from. They do tend to apply one way or another to most applications. They were implemented really not until 2009 by FCC Order 08165. That is what established, when you see the time frames in the 3rd item there, those are also referred to as shot clocks. And there are actually a total of about 5. There's a 30-day, once an application is submitted, a formal application, there's a 30-day response where the city or the municipality would need to respond to say this is incomplete. After that, there is a response. If it remains incomplete, there's a 10-day limit. So those are just for incomplete applications. Otherwise, there can be a 60-day time frame for certain types of co-locations. There can be a 90-day time frame for other types, and I'll touch a little bit on some of these, and then 150 for a new installation. So there are fairly strict timelines. What happens is, if those timelines aren't honored, part of the reason why FCC Order 08165 was put in place in 2009 was the FCC was reporting, hearing from service providers, that local governments were not responding to applications. It might have been partly that local governments weren't quite sure how to respond, but in any event, that's why those timeframes were put in place. Now, the newer law that Dennis had mentioned, it's actually a bill passed as part of the 2012 budget laws. The 2012 Spectrum Act is what it's referred to, and actually the big part of it was taking some of the public service, fire and police radio transmissions out of what the transmission normally used and opening up some other, opening up that in some ways for wireless. But that is often referred to as Section 6904A. That was implemented by the more recent FCC order in 2014, which became effective last year, and that's FCC Order 14-153. That imposes some additional parameters, some additional considerations, some would say limitations as well, that may depend on the specific application. Here tonight, we're not looking at a specific application, we're looking at options. But as it hones down to what the preferences are or are not, then considering what elements of the 96 Act, that FCC order, what elements of the 2012 Act, we'll have to consider what the parameters are and what the limits are. These are 5 that tend to apply. How strictly they apply often depends on, yes, indeed, the facts. For instance, no regulation actually, city action could prohibit entirely the provision of personal wireless services. That means a step that effectively prohibits it. That does require some element of a show of necessity, gap in coverage, perhaps. The second item, no discrimination among providers. That actually means no unreasonable discrimination among similarly situated providers. How broadly that would be interpreted would depend on the court. Generally, yes, all of the carriers must be treated equally. We've mentioned the time frames, or I refer to as shot clocks as well. Decisions for denial do have to be in writing. That is, once an application is received. Now, we've been, the city and city staff have actually been working with Crown Council, so we're not dealing with an actual live application at this point. But once you get to that point, a denial does have to be in writing and does have to provide substantial evidence to back it up. And then regulations can't be on the basis of the environmental effects of what's known as RF or radio frequency. However, city could, municipalities can request a level of assurance that whatever's being installed does comply with, in fact, the FCC regulations. So, again, it can't be the basis of the RF emissions where that is raised as an issue. That was included in the 96 Act, repeated in the 2012 Act as well. But to assure compliance, at least with the FCC regulations, that inquiry can certainly be made. Again, that's a general overview of what applies. Of the 4 laws that are in place, essentially the 2 sets of laws, the 96 and the FCC order applying that, and 2012 and the FCC order applying that, there are elements of limits and parameters and restrictions that would apply depending on what's proposed, depending on issues such as height, issues such as are we talking about a replacement of a pole, adding to a pole, what are the height restrictions, and those are laid out, and those are the kinds of details that will depend on what's actually being proposed once we get into that.
So kind of the next step is, where does this all start? And again, any utility company that's going to use our right-of-way would enter into a right-of-way agreement and also a franchise agreement. And these establish some basic parameters. Specifically related to small cell, they would talk about general location issues, placements, fees associated with the use of the right-of-way. And then there are other things that we can look at controlling in terms of aesthetic issues such as design, color, height, placement of equipment, and general location of the utility poles. Because of some of the things that Frank mentioned, to meet some of the timelines required under the federal statutes, staff has tried to develop a process that would help us meet those requirements. Again, 60 days is not a very, sounds like a long period of time, but actually is a fairly short period of time for us to review these applications. So we have developed a standard right-of-way agreement, and that's actually been completed. And we do have that in a draft form.
Is that a 60-day calendar period, or is it a 60-day business day period?
Calendar days.
Okay.
The next process is, because the shot clock starts when a formal application is actually submitted and accepted, we've actually developed a process where we have a pre-application process that's required prior to the actual submission of an application. So any applicant would have to meet with staff, go over the requirements, talk about what their intent is. We'd look at where they're looking at doing these facilities, ask a lot of questions, and before they could actually submit that formal application, the way we've structured it is we would sign off that they've met all the pre-application requirements. Again, those still have to be done in a fairly timely manner, but that does give us the ability to say, you need to reconsider or look at these issues before you submit the application.
So Dennis, are you tracking two separate shot clocks for a 704 application versus a Spectrum application?
There are different shot clocks, and it will be dependent upon what type of application it is. So we are trying to track all of those. Again, there's actually more than two, I believe. I think there are actually
three that directly
three.
apply. Yeah.
Well, because the Spectrum Act one would be the most critical, because it does have a
60.
deemed granting provision if we don't meet the timelines.
There are other provisions too that are a little bit odd in some of those that say that once we ask them to provide additional data, we can't go back again and ask for additional data, which is kind of an odd requirement because often things come up as you work through the process. But that's something that we're going to have to deal with. One of the reasons we created that pre-application process, so we get a better idea of what we're actually dealing with. Where we're at tonight is to try to develop some standards or prototypes for designs and locations that would be approved by the city council, because that would help our streamlined process. So if somebody meets those design criteria, we'd move through the process without going back to the city council. One of the things we've also talked about is allowing future applications, again, that met those standard designs or that were co-locations in existing facilities. Tonight you'll see what's being discussed is most of the facilities allow for more than one provider in each of the locations that we're talking about. In fact, all the ones that we're dealing with today have at least locations for 3 different providers within the structures. And that, again, is subject to the mayor and council approval. So again, as we work on the pre-approval process, staff has actually been working with an existing provider because we didn't want to create prototypes that were done in a vacuum. Again, we could come up with designs that we think meet what the community is looking for, what the city is looking for, but under the federal regulations, we are limited that we can't create something that effectively prohibits them from actually doing something within the right-of-way. So issues that we considered during the development of the prototypes were placement of the existing facilities owned by other entities. So that could include Pepco poles, things like that, that we don't actually own, that they could locate on those types of facilities. Retrofitting of existing light poles, and Ollie will get into a little bit later some of the issues that we have with the residential light poles that we have in our communities are slightly different than we have in surrounding communities, and so that proposes some difficulties.
Do we know the mix of our city-owned light poles versus other entity-owned light poles in our city?
In terms of light poles, Ollie will get into that in terms of we own. There are very few that are actually light poles that are owned by other entities. There is some, not gray area, but uniqueness in Gaithersburg and in Maryland. So Pepco would actually own the electrical line that runs between the light poles, but we physically own the light pole itself in most cases. There are other cases in the newer developments where we own the entire system, where we own the electrical line. So for instance, in Crown, which is a metered system, where we actually know how much electricity we're using, those will be owned ultimately by us in totality, the lines and the poles. But in most of our city, we don't actually own the electrical line. It runs through the ground, connects to the pole, and then we own the pole itself. The other issue is replacement of existing street lights, how that could happen if it's going to be in that location. Separate pole installations was another consideration. Design, color, and type of pole. Again, we have a variety of different pole types within our communities. Sometimes they're decorative in nature, such as Crown and Kentlands. And then in some areas, we have the standard, what we call the colonial light, which is either a black pole with a colonial light fixture on top of it. Long-term maintenance issues with regards to the facilities, either that we would own or that providers would own. And then finally, pole and equipment locations. There are some varieties within those parameters of where both the pole could be located and also where the equipment that is associated with these types of facilities could be located. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ollie, and he's going to talk about the residential prototype options and retrofitting.
And to answer your question, Mr. Wu, we have about 4,600 lights in the city. 3,800 of them are considered fed underground, they're the metal poles, and 800 lights are the above ground Pepco wooden poles. So any lights in the city that are composite metal, that don't have wires, overhead wires attached to them, we own those.
Are they otherwise encumbered by, so we own them outright? We have
There are
totals.
poles.
Okay, so not encumbered by
From the ground up, they're
Pepco?
ours. From the ground, the wiring underground is Pepco's. So a lot of times when you come in and ask us if we want to take a look at a light, we do that. If we find out it's an underground issue, we're not allowed to touch the underground wiring, so we go to Pepco for that. So that's sort of the split. And of the 3,800 city-owned lights, about 50% of those could not be retrofitted because they're different variations of the example that you see in front of you. That's the standard Colonial post top light. There really is not a way to put an antenna on top of that. So they could not be retrofitted. These, as I said, are luminaires mounted on tops of light posts, not designed allowed for any extension of the antenna array. And because so many of the lights are this is not something that the staff is really recommending at this time. Instead, what we're recommending is replacement of, well, let me take that back. This is an example of if you wanted to replace the Colonial top post light with the antenna array, what you would have to do is you would have a light that would come off on the side on an arm, and that would be at the same general level that the existing light is now, but that would be placed on a pole that would be about 25 feet in height.
Ollie, what's the height of the standard or
Standard poles
Poles.
are under 15 feet. Generally, they're about 12 feet, and the assembly is about a foot. So somewhere between 12 and 15 feet is what the majority of our lights are. So if you replace these and you put lights in them, the questions that we had is who owns the lights? And then who would be responsible for the maintenance? There's competing interests. We would want the light to be working properly. They would be wanting the antenna equipment to be working. So what happens if different things go out? One of the things that the council's always been concerned about is that we get the lights turned back on in a timely manner. So if we don't own these lights, then we have to go through a third party to do that. And then the other question is just an aesthetic question, is the mixing of different style lights, post-mounted versus light poles with the small mast arms. So those are some of the issues that we looked at. As I said, this is not recommended by staff, but if this were to occur, staff would recommend that the provider owns and maintains the pole and the light fixture. So if we're going to do it, I think you need to have a direct separation there, and they'd be responsible for these poles. So what we talked about is when we looked in the existing communities, we talked about where the poles would be located. Our first thought was the residential locations. We would do, wherever we could, we would do those at intersections. It appears that the poles that Dennis was talking about that's across the street from this on the other side of 28, most of those appear to be set up at intersections. One of the things that we talked about is at many of the intersections you have a stop sign, you have a street name sign, and what we thought we would do is you would basically swap out the new pole and replace the existing stop sign and the street's pole. So we would be adding the existing signage to these equipments. One of the important things we wanted to do is make sure the style and the color of the pole would match those of the lights in the community. So if you have decorative light poles in the community, we would try to match that. If you have the composite type poles, the black standard poles, we would try to match that. The equipment to power the antennas could either be mounted on the pole or ground mounted. If you did either one of those options, if you look in front of you, the taller, smaller diameter pole would be the example of what you would use in that case. The third alternative is to install all the equipment except the electric meter in a larger diameter monopole. And that is the larger diameter pole that you see there. That's about an 18-inch pole. So if you put the materials inside of each other, they're going to be the larger pole. You attach them to the pole or attach them next to the pole, it's going to be the smaller pole.
Can our
Fourth option.
camera people get a shot of that so that everybody can see what it looks like?
A fourth option would be to underground them, but some of the issues with that are just the amount of other things that are in the right-of-way often makes it difficult to actually have enough room for a vault to put all the equipment in. The provider would also tell you that from a technical standpoint, that would cause difficulty for them because of water issues. But it is another option.
Holly, can I ask a question?
Uh-huh.
There was some question raised about road safety standards and whether there'd be any issue with road safety standards in terms of, whether there has to be some minimum requirement for the way that a stop sign pole is designed or a street sign pole is designed.
And the discussion was about clear zones, and clear zones are really not intended to be design standards for residential neighborhoods. They're not intended to be design standards for roads with speeds of 25 miles an hour. We have to think about the clear zones, but if you think about almost any residential neighborhood that you go into, there's things between the sidewalk and the curb. There's street trees, there's lights, there's fire hydrants, all those activities. And what you're doing on higher speed roads is the curb does not provide any protection. So the idea is to try to move the equipment as far away as you can. But for lower speed roads, the curb does provide a level of protection. Even besides that, if you look at roads, an example that we've done is you look at Muddy Branch, you look at the outside edge, and once again, there's all kinds of equipment on the outside edge. There's lights in the sidewalk. There's all kinds of equipment there. When you look in the center, there is no curb there, and the speeds are much higher, so you need to do something to protect that. So what they suggest that you do for these poles is at a minimum, you move them 18 inches away from the curb so that mirrors don't hit them. And then what you do, depending on the width of the grass strip, you try to move the poles back as far as you can in the grass strip. But if you have a 6-foot grass strip, that just means that you're moving the pole, depending on the size of the pole, 4 feet back from the curb.
And when you say they, are you talking about federal
Federal
road
guidelines,
standards?
yeah. They want you to think about, yes, they want you to think about these, and they want you to, it's not a design requirement, but they want you to think about this when you look at street design. So you're not putting poles right up next to the curb so it can hit by mirrors. If you've got 6 foot of green space, you put the poles back as close to the sidewalk as you can get. But if you have 6 feet to work with, you have 6 feet to work with.
So Ollie, what's the width of the right-of-ways typically in the city?
It really depends. It's if you have, probably most of the older streets have streets that are 2 12-foot lanes. If you don't have any parking on them, you may have 2 5-foot grass strips on either, let's say 2 5-foot grass strips on either side, so that would make it 34 feet. And then you would have a 5-foot sidewalk on either side of that, so that would make it around 44 feet. But it really depends. If you have parking, that could add up to another 14 feet on the street. Many of our neighborhoods they're either 32 feet or 36-foot roadways. So once again, if you have grass strips and sidewalks, you're adding probably another 20 feet to that. So you're getting up to around a right-of-way of about 60 feet.
And so the rights-of-way, it sounds like they're encumbrances on personal property or real property that residents in the communities own.
They would actually be owned by the city. The right-of-way, even though it might appear that it's part of somebody's front yard, the right-of-way is actually owned by the city. It's not an easement similar to a utility easement. It's actually owned by the city.
And so are the rights of way, do they have any other legal relationship to other entities such as the county, the state, the utilities? Or are we the sole owners of these rights of way in the city?
We're theoretically the sole owner, but they do have other issues with them, and that's why we develop right-of-way agreements for how they can be used.
And just for clarification, there are a number of streets that are not city roads. So the rights of ways in those roads would either be county or state.
So the number roads and the 270?
Number roads are the state.
So for instance, Muddy Branch, there usually tend to be arterials, but that's not always the case. Long Draft is another example where it's county-owned.
Fields Road.
Fields Road, they're county-owned roads, so the right-of-way is owned by the county, and we would have no jurisdiction over those areas.
But as far as residential neighborhoods and the examples that were given, that will be given here tonight, are those city-owned rights of way?
Yes. There could be private streets, which we would have no regulatory authority over those in terms of placement.
And just in general terms, the right-of-way generally is either at the back edge of the sidewalk or a foot back from that. So that's not the case all the time, but in general, the right-of-way is from the back of the sidewalk to the back of the sidewalk. So this is a typical intersection. It shows a location that you have a pole with a stop sign and a street name sign on it. And what we're talking about, one of the options is taking that and replacing it with one of the new poles. And we would replace, we'd put the sign, the signs back on it. In this case, you have the equipment attached to the pole. This is the same location and just shows an example of the equipment being next to the pole, ground mounted. So one of the things we talked about
That doesn't
is,
change the width of the pole there.
it does not change the
Those
width of
two
the pole
options.
at all.
So the third option that we did not show would be using the larger diameter pole where all the equipment is inside and we would still mount this, the stop sign and the street signs to that one.
So you're talking about three options, just to be clear, because they're not in the presentation. One with a skinnier pole with the box mounted on top of it. A second one with the skinnier pole with the box mounted on the ground next to it. And a third with a wider pole with the equipment inside it and no box,
Except for a meter.
except for a small meter on the outside.
And that's sort of what, this third option is what we talked about doing at 9 intersections. And we said at locations where the poles cannot be located at intersection, the use of the larger diameter poles would be used. And as you just stated, it would contain most but not all the accessory equipment. The electrical meter would be mounted on the exterior.
So Dennis, is it just Crown Castle that's expressed interest as of yet, or are there other?
We do have one other provider, I don't know the name off the top of my head, who's asked for our standard right-of-way agreement. So it is potentially more than one company.
And this last example is what we just talked about. This would be at a 9 intersection, and this is something showing the larger pole.
And one of the reasons staff is recommending this type of pole, the monopole that has all the equipment inside in these locations, is typically we have less right-of-way than we do at intersections. So doing ground-mounted equipment would be very difficult in a number of these locations. So with that, I'll get into the commercial locations. For commercial locations, it wasn't as critical for pole placements in intersections, partly because of the way the lights lay out. In a lot of residential areas, we actually have street lights that are directly in front of somebody's front door, close to their garage. So we have a little bit more options. So we're showing some examples where there's a standalone steel pole at an intersection, and decorative poles. And we tend to have more decorative poles in some of our commercial districts than we do in some other areas that are just purely residential in nature. So this would be an example where you have kind of a mid-block pole that has the equipment actually attached on the outside. So in terms of reference point, that would be the taller of the two examples that you have in front of you. And then we would attach anything if we had a speed sign or any other informational sign, it would be attached in those locations. We do try to limit the number of things that we have in the right of way, so if we can consolidate, we do consolidate those aspects. This is another example which would occur actually at the street intersection location, and you'll notice there's a yield sign on the back of this sign. It's the same standard design with the box mounted on the outside. And again, in these cases, we try to match the color and shape of the existing poles of kind of these shoebox lights that you can see in this particular case. You know, another alternative that could be explored that we had some difficulty in determining how do we deal with maintenance issues is you could actually put all of this on and modify this pole. But again, how do we manage in terms of overall the operation of that light, who owns the pole, all of those things get to be a little bit more complicated.
And what we found in that example, at least so far, is it appears they do not want to come back and re-engineer that pole. They would come back and replace that with a pole that would look very similar. And I think they do that because structurally they have a comfort that the pole that they want to do is structurally sound enough to hold the equipment. So they would rather replace these than try to retrofit them, I believe.
They being Crown Castle?
Yes.
And most providers.
Yes.
So here's an example of the monopole, which would be the larger diameter pole. Could be used also as an example. Typically, this one's being shown kind of in a mid-block intersection. And you'll notice this one's a little bit different. It's green because in the area that it's shown in, all the light poles in that area are actually painted green as opposed to that. There are options in terms of decorative base. We've had quite a bit of discussion about that. You'll notice when you look at signalization lights, they'll often have a decorative base on it. One issue with that is you're basically going to increase this diameter at the bottom. So from staff's perspective, really, we felt it would be better just to have the standard pole rather than place some decorative element around it, just to increase the diameter of the size. We thought it would blend in better with those areas. So kind of looking at the real life examples, the ones that are shown in the slide, you know, Crown Castle's been working in terms of the pre-approval application process. So they're showing 4 new facilities in the Rio commercial areas. 3 of those are kind of utilitarian type poles, and 1 is a decorative pole. We kind of went through those, and I'll show you some maps of those locations. Again, one of the reasons we wanted to look at them on the ground is what's the density level? Kind of how many poles would you need to service a particular area? So it gets us a feel of, you know, what is the number of poles we're looking at in a general area. Again, it's not going to be consistent through each area based upon topography and other issues for coverage, but we did want to make sure we had kind of a live example of that. And then the second part is installation of 5 facilities in residential communities of Washingtonian Woods. 2 of those, or both of those in Washingtonian Woods, are actually at intersections. And then Wesley, we have 1 at an intersection and 2 kind of non-intersection lights, even though 1's close to an intersection.
Has Crown provided you with any coverage maps?
We have not looked at the coverage maps at this point. It could be part of the application when we have the full submittal. Again, coverage maps are dependent on an engineer reviewing those, and so we only have a limited amount of time to do those reviews. So here's an example of the residential sites. Again, some of these are located at intersections. This one's actually at an intersection with a stop sign. This one's near an intersection, and this is more of a mid-block. And staff did work with them to say, hey, wouldn't it be possible to do another intersection? Again, I'm sure this property owner doesn't want it next to them any more than this property owner does, but we are trying to create a consistency through the neighborhood. They've indicated based on their coverage, they would not be able to meet their coverage and do that. So we do try to work with them in site locations. You'll also notice some of these red circles where they've indicated that there was a site here, and we asked what would happen if you moved it to the intersection. In this particular case, they could move it to the intersection.
Do you know if they're considering services being provided by the primary carrier, so Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint?
They have not
'Cause I think-
indicated which providers they're using, but they would be the standard providers that are in the market.
Because their technology is an integrated, essentially, I guess, they reroute other carriers, so they provide services for AT&T, T-Mobile.
Typically, they would
Sprint.
actually, one of the units in it would be dedicated to one provider. So if they were working with T-Mobile, one of the units within that facility would actually be dedicated to T-Mobile. It's not like they're interchangeable.
When you say units, you're talking about a component inside the pole.
Yes.
So there could be 3 components inside the pole,
So there
with
could
each
be-
component operating for a different
Correct.
cell phone
Yeah, 3
carrier.
carriers.
Yes.
Okay.
Or, depending on their coverage needs, there could be, 2 Verizon and 1 T-Mobile, It's all dependent upon what the issues are for that particular provider.
And I guess why I asked that question is just to make sure that when we're looking at this, we're looking at the total coverage for the area. So if T-Mobile already has a big cell tower somewhere and it's providing coverage to the area, we're not just talking about Crown Castle's coverage for the area, we're talking about the total carrier coverage.
Yes, and again, these are to supplement. One of the things about small cell is to get the end user closer to the terminus of where they're receiving their data from. So if you're with you're looking at one of the tall towers that's 150 feet, those are going to be pretty well spread out. These connect directly through fiber optic to their hubs, so the connection is much quicker than trying to find a cell tower. So it's not just about coverage, it's about data and how fast the data is coming through the lines and the quantity of data that you would need for a particular area.
Do we know the range of their towers? The Crown Castle?
Of these particular ones?
Correct.
Depends on
It's
location.
really dependent so much on location,
Location.
and topography and trees and
Yeah,
other
well,
things.
there's data out there. So the larger cell towers are 5 to 40 miles. The smaller ones, I guess on their website, they said they were 2.5 to 5.
But the large towers also have dead spots. They have dead spots in many parts of the city where there's large towers in proximity, but the signal is pretty, is lost in some areas. So there are dead zones even within a large tower, so.
Which is why I'm asking about the coverage.
This is why they're, no, I think that's a good point, but I think this is why the carriers claim they need these things as well, so. Yeah, I mean, the problem is that if you have 6 carriers, that means you're gonna have to have 2 facilities to accommodate 6 carriers, right?
It
In
is
any
possible to have
particular
more than-
area, if they need that, if they claim they need that coverage.
Yes, if they're more than that provider.
Right.
Seems to be consolidation in the field, but.
Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, sorry.
So on the commercial sites, these are the commercial sites that are being considered with that. And again, it's a little bit easier here because they tend to, be on more heavily designed streets. They're 4-lane streets as opposed to small residential scale streets.
Are 2 of those sites, are they actually in the city limits?
Some of them are
The
not.
Shelburne one doesn't look
Right.
to be, and Washingtonian Boulevard, the one farther west.
Correct, and some of these aren't actually in city right-of-way.
Right.
It does get to be a question that some of these are going to be controlled by other entities, not the city. And so they may actually look different than what we install in our community, even though the perception is they're in our community. We just don't have the ability to regulate outside of our own right-of-way.
And so so basically on that map, there's 2 red circles on Fields Road off of, in what would be Crown. Is that in the city's right of way or is that in the
Some of
county's
those I
right?
would actually have to look at in detail whether they're in the city's right-of-way.
Okay. Would you point
No, no,
those
no.
out? Hmm?
You point them out to me.
Right
I'm the
here.
call one.
Right there.
So like this one, we think is
Yeah.
in the city, but this one is actually not in the city.
Okay. Yeah, so we're gonna have that puzzle to deal with as well, in which there won't be any consistency in the configuration or the appearance of these. It's possible that could happen, right?
Especially when you get borderline streets that the county either owns or the state owns, they could have different requirements than we do. In addition, they often have different light facilities where they would have Cobra headlights, which often they'll just install them directly onto the Cobra headlight fixture.
Can you
that doesn't-
explain, just explain
So
for
a
us what
Cobra
a Cobra
headlight
headlight is?
fixture, I'd have to go back to the very beginning.
It's what you have out on Maryland 355, the metal pole
It's a tall metal pole with
with
the,
the.
It extends horizontally, yeah.
So a Cobra headlight fixture is this type of light fixture.
Mhm.
So, and actually a lot of Montgomery residential neighborhoods have this as their standard residential light fixture. And so they are looking at different prototypes than we are.
Mike, your question about in the right-of-way, for Fields Road, it would generally be Montgomery County's call.
Right.
In the case, the one example that we showed, the first one, that is in the right-of-way of the side street. So
Okay.
even though it's right at the intersection, it's in the right-of-way of Strummer Lane.
Mhm.
So that's why we are looking at, if it was probably 10 feet away, it would be Montgomery County's.
All right.
So Ollie's going to kind of talk about the ultimate decision points. Again, we're looking for feedback and direction at this point, but there are kind of decision points that we need both for the residential and the commercial, and they pretty much correspond to each other, but we're going to kind of run through those just to refresh everybody's memory.
And these are things that we've already talked about. So the pole locations, what we've said is our first priority is if you have an existing utility pole. If there are wooden poles out there, if there's above ground lighting, that's our first priority. If not, we're saying our second priority would be intersection locations, and then the third priority would be non-intersections on joint property lines. So the best that we can do is not in front of someone's house. Color and style, we're talking about depending on what the neighborhoods have, the style and the color of the pole would match those of the light poles in the residential community or in the commercial area. You really have the three choices here for the type of pole and the equipment location. We've talked about this a couple times. Intersection with pole-mounted equipment, intersection with ground-mounted equipment, monopole with internal equipment, except the electric meter. That's the larger one. Really, you could do that at intersection. You could do that at non-intersection, either one. And then really the fourth choice that we just talked a little bit would be if the equipment was mounted underground. And Dennis talked a little bit about the issues with that. Height, the council could establish a maximum height for this. It appears in most of the ones that we've seen so far is the heights that they're looking at is somewhere in the vicinity of a Cobra head light. So you're talking about the height of the pole being between 25 and 30 feet, and then a antenna array being on top of that. And the antenna array, I think, many times is about 4 feet tall. Ownership. Once again, we're recommending that the provider would own any of the poles, even if they have a light.
So in addition to the location of the poles, the providers would have to run fiber optic between these poles as well. So there's going to be a lot of other construction, ground construction, disruption of the vegetation in the right-of-way, et cetera, to put those cables in, correct?
And part of the right-of-way agreement talks about that and spells out the responsibility of the applicant to alert the neighborhood of that and to, take as much care as they can to disturb the minimum amount possible.
And as part of the pre-application process, we will be asking them where they're going to be going with their additional, fiber optic, that they need to go back to a hub or another location. You can't just show where the pole is going to go, but where are the hub and how are you going to get back there?
Yeah.
Again, they also have to deal with Pepco in terms of the electrical aspects for these facilities. They do need electrical service.
Dennis, can you speak up a little?
They do need electrical service to operate too, so they're actually that additional in addition to the fiber optic.
Are they going to have to dig up like routes all along the way from whatever the source of the fiber optic cable would be, or are they going to use existing fiber optic
They would
from
be
other
doing
carriers?
their own existing or their own fiber optic. So they could do boring, which a lot of companies do provide that. We could spell out things like that when we approve the application. Some of it depends on the location. So it's so unique, we don't know where the hubs are exactly in relationship. I do know they try to get the poles closer to the hub because that's less fiber optic that they actually have to run. But they would actually, some cases Verizon would own, they might own their own fiber optic, but like T-Mobile doesn't own their own fiber, so they have to work with another provider.
Are there any other ancillary facilities we have to worry about other than the pole, the little box that attaches to the pole and the fiber optics running from the pole?
No, because they'd be hooking up to existing facilities. If there are any, we haven't seen any at this point, but they would have to show them as part of the application process, should they need to put in a new hub or some other location. If it's too far away, they may have to work with another provider to put in a connection point to get to the hub. So that is possible, but they would be similar to other facilities that we already have in the right of way.
What's the dimensions of the equipment box?
They really range in size, I think. Look at my drawings.
Give us a second. It's all right.
So the cabinet is approximately 49 inches tall.
4 feet. That's 4 feet. 4 feet.
32 inches wide.
4 by 3.
So again, it provides 3 providers within that box itself.
All right, so were you done with the presentation? Did we reach the end?
We just have a few quick things, and I'll run through these quickly because they're similar to the residential. Again, the first priority and second priority and third priority are basically the same for commercial properties. Color and style are the same. Types of poles and where the equipment is placed is the same. And then you could limit the height again. In most commercial areas, they're talking about taller poles. Some of them are about 45 feet. Again, a lot of the areas that we're looking at these, the actual light fixtures that we have in the surrounding area are also taller than the standard 15-foot residential pole. And then ownership, again, would be the other issue. So they're very parallel to the residential. Some other things that we're actually recommending as part of the process. Again, because of some of the timelines, staff is kind of recommending that we have staff approval to approve these designs that meet the prototypes that the council would identify, and then that the contractor would be responsible for notifying the property owner that's directly adjacent to the facility that's being installed. Again, in some cases, that might be 2 property owners when the pole is located on a property line between 2 residences or between 2 commercial properties. But we do think, although there wouldn't be a lot of discussion about where the pole is going to be, we think it's important that the property owner know prior to actually the installation, so they don't just come home one day and see somebody working in front of their front yard.
Okay,
That would
go
be
ahead. Oh, you done?
We're done.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks for helping us get our arms around a big subject and for all you've done to prep for this this work session. Given the legal parameters as we understand them, I can tell you that there's nobody here at the dais that's made happy whenever a different level of government encroaches on the authority of the municipal government, and we're seeing it happen time and time again. But I think in general, as a general statement, where we want to end up with this is we're going to have to comply with law. We want facilities in the city to look as nice as they can look, and we want them to be located as unobtrusively as possible. Obviously, we have a little bit broader range of heights when we're talking about commercial versus residential neighborhoods. So I think that's the general direction that we need to be. But and I know we have a lot of people in the audience who'd like to speak. So very quickly, who'd like to?
Let me keep my comments to a minimum. I mean, I like the way we've approached this. We obviously have our hands tied because of a lot of legal ramifications, but at the same time, we have some options to do what's prudent. Put things at intersections, put things with existing light poles, and keep things to a minimum. If you go into certain neighborhoods, and I've noticed this recently, you see a stop sign, you see a right-of-way sign, you see a snow removal sign, you see a dog sign. If we can combine those on one pole, it sort of takes away from all the clutter and puts it all in one place. So being prudent, using some common sense is the way we have to approach it. And I like the way you all have looked at it. Let's look at the existing poles, just keep the height to the minimum, and then try to keep it away from property owners as much as possible. There are times when you just cannot do it, and then we'll do the best we can and provide, the owners plenty of notification. So I think we're on the right path, but there's still a lot of stuff we have to talk about.
Thank you for the presentation. I know this is a complicated and emotional issue for a lot of folks, myself included. One of the things that was mentioned in the presentation was this idea that of the limited areas in which the city still has authority to regulate, the word location comes up. And I'm wondering if you could provide a little clarity on what is meant by regulation of location in terms of the city's authority, because I don't want us or the members of the public to have the wrong impression when we're saying that we have some authority to regulate location. Maybe that's a question for Frank. I don't know.
And in terms of discussion, Dennis and Ollie can certainly fill in as well. But if a provider comes in and says, I need to have a facility in this location, this particular area, that is where we do have the ability to negotiate, as we have in many instances, to say we'd rather have it at the intersection. There are times when they have to test, go back to their engineers to determine if that will work either as well or effectively as well, almost as well, shall we say, and give us that sort of leeway. So yeah, that is primarily where we do have the ability to work with them, and that's a big part of the discussion that has been going on.
But if they come back to us and say, no, it doesn't work in that location, then what?
If it will not work in that location and it's clear that there is a need, that there would be perhaps a gap in coverage, that could be something then that we have to weigh more carefully as far as approval or not. That could end up being an application where we do end up, essentially because of the federal restrictions, depending on some of the other factors of the specific installation, as far as which law applies, that we might end up having to approve it. Those seem to be fairly rare, and again, it would depend on the other aspects as well.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily that if they say it has to be here, that necessarily means that the city has to accept that. There can be some other parameters that would have to be considered.
So they could come back and say, we need 2 cells because you're making us put this here. We need a second cell as a repeater.
That's possible.
Okay.
Okay, and then a related question, also in the presentation, there was a slide that talked about if a local government were to deny an application, that it would have to be a written denial, and it would have to have a clear basis for the denial.
Substantial evidence.
Substantial evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't want to, if we don't know the answer, I don't want to force you to kind of reach a conclusion right on the spot here, but if you do know the answer, can you give us a better idea of what are the bases that would be permissible bases for denial? I'm assuming that they're the same bases that are the same areas that we are permitted to regulate as a local government. So aesthetic look or something like that.
There are some that are somewhat across the board, but again, because, and we had talked about the 2 different laws that apply, it's a bit more restrictive for those that would be applicable under the 2012 Act. But in general, safety across the board, structural safety of the structure can be a consideration. Stealth is something that's referenced in many parts of the law. How that applies, again, it does come down to the facts. It depends on the specific application, but visual could certainly be a part of it. We have certainly asserted that the visual appearance, that is, dealing with color and all of that, certainly should be part of the application. Other parameters that can be part of it can include, of course, size, a substantial change in physical dimensions. Generally, there are certain number limits depending on the type of application it is and which law primarily applies. The 96 law tends to apply across the board, but there are some to which the additional laws will also apply. So that's part of appearance, certainly, but just the issue of height. The issue of height may also be a safety factor as well. That certainly has been some of what we're looking at. There are size limits both as to height and as to cabinets. Generally, actually, the limitation where it does apply, and it doesn't necessarily apply in all cases, would be about 6 feet. There can be some limits on excavation, again, depending on the application and depending on what's being proposed. Those are and again, I had mentioned the visual limits. Certainly if there's a stealth requirement already in place, that also would carry over to any new application as well. And that would be true even under the more restrictive. But again, as to which ones apply to a specific application, it really would depend on the size of the pole, what we're dealing with, what kind of installation is going to be required to make that work.
For the public, I just want to point out we didn't introduce Frank before. Frank is our assistant city attorney. If you all didn't gather that from context.
And Frank can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is the case. Looking at the pre-applications that we've looked at, if someone comes in and makes a request to place a pole in the middle of a residential neighborhood, we're going to have limited ability to move that around. I think we've talked about it, we were talking about moving tens of feet, so we could move it up to maybe 100 feet, but we're not going to be able, I don't believe we're going to be able to take a request that's in the middle of a residential neighborhood and move it outside of the residential neighborhood.
So do we know if the applications that are being advanced, are being advanced under the rubric of the 704 application or under a Spectrum application? The reason I ask is because under Spectrum Act, we have a lot more limitations on what we can and can't do than a 704 application. Have they at all talked about that at all?
I believe most of them would be 7.
Okay, so they're not advancing, we're looking for co-location with existing facilities under the new FCC order 14153.
It all depends on how we approach it too. So if you're doing a new facility, that's slightly different than if you're co-locating on an existing light pole.
Right.
So in some cases, it depends on how we approach the issue. Under the FCC regulations, my understanding is an existing light pole is a co-location.
Well,
and I don't want to get into specifics. I think
yeah,
it would be better
I'm just
if
trying to feel out where we're coming
provide
from.
a better explanation through some written memo or something like that, because these get really detailed in terms of specifics. It would be better if we sit down and think about what you've indicated and give you all the scenarios based upon the different alternatives. It's really hard just to pick one alternative and say, this is what applies in this particular case.
Have we approved any wireless
Oh, wait,
facilities?
Rob, I think Ryan had one more
Oh, I'm
question.
sorry.
Yeah,
Did
I had a couple more.
I apologize, Ryan.
That's all right. I had a technical question. I'm not sure this is one that you all can answer, but I'll try. My understanding of how large traditional towers work is that the signal that they emit is parallel to the ground, parallel to the horizon, essentially. It goes that way, out from the transmitting component. Do we know if the small cell installations operate the same way in terms of how the signal operates? I'm just curious, because my understanding is that's the reason why taller towers are more effective, because if they're emitting horizontally, then they can sort of go farther, I guess.
Line of
Sort of a
sight, they call it.
technical RF question, but I'm just curious.
I'm not an RF engineer. I would have to actually.
We'll have to get
try
to
to
that
Okay,
one.
all right. 'Cause, I mean, I think because that is somewhat related to the question of height of a tower, for example.
Again, most of these, they try to get near or under the tree canopy.
Right.
For that reason, but I would have to
We'll
get
have to-
some technical.
Okay,
questions.
all right.
It's too technical for me.
And then, if my colleagues will indulge me, I just wanted to very briefly address the members of the public who are here and who are watching at home. As you've heard tonight, and those of you who've been paying careful attention, first of all, it's nice to see so many of you here. Sorry it's at an occasion where we're dealing with something that folks might not be happy with, but I think it's a testament to my colleagues up here that we've tried to reach out to members of the public and make sure that you are aware of this initial discussion. And it is just an initial discussion, and we have to continue this process, and there will be more opportunities to weigh in on this process publicly. Tonight is just an initial discussion. But for those that I've had the opportunity to talk with, and for those who've been paying attention and reviewing the background materials, clearly this is a complicated issue of federal regulations being imposed, as the mayor already said. So I would urge those of you who are concerned about that aspect of this discussion to contact your U.S. senators and your Congress member and the FCC and let them know through your public comments if you have concerns about the way the federal law is being imposed on municipalities. I think that's important that they hear from you and from all of us. So I did just want to say that. And I did want to remind folks, before we open to public comments, you've all been very patiently waiting to have your turn to give your public comments, that is the situation that we are dealing with, as has been said many times already tonight. We will hear and put into the record anything you all want to say tonight, but we are obviously constrained by this process, and Dennis has been walking around with a bullseye on his back for the last couple weeks on this issue, so I thank him and I thank the rest of staff who've been dealing with this. But please do remember the context in which we are dealing with this difficult issue. But with that said, I know my colleagues may have some other questions, but then we will, of course, welcome all your comments.
We'll go forward with Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I apologize, Ryan, I thought you were finished. I was asking my question. Have we approved any wireless facilities in any of our rights-of-way in the city?
I am not aware of any that we've approved.
So here's, the reason I'm asking about.
In the right-of-way. They're
In
all
the
on
right-of-way, okay, so.
they're
They're
on
on city
parkland, other city-owned property.
And have we approached the Rio or any of the residents to find out if they want these things on their property? Wait, no. I asked that in context of a point that I want Frank to possibly look into and for Dennis to look into as well, because I'm a regulatory attorney, so what I do when I have these issues is I look at the law. I looked at all the Supreme Court decisions, Fourth Circuit decisions. I've looked at the FCC order and all the stuff surrounding it. And what I see is a distinction between our regulatory authority and a proprietary authority. So do we know, are these applications being advanced in our regulatory capacity or in our capacity as the owners of this property? Frank or Dennis, any?
Generally as the owners, and we can certainly discuss the details because there are some exceptions to the proprietary element that you're talking about, and which can include right-of-ways, but we really should consider again the specific locations, and there are some different legal parameters there to take a look at.
Okay, because most of the case law I looked at talks about it in the regulatory capacity. So some private citizen wants to put something up on their property in conjunction with Verizon. Do we have the authority to then regulate them? And that's primarily what 704 and the Spectrum Act apply to. The legal aspects of that apply to proprietary aspects of these decisions is we have a lot more leeway in that. And I got to thinking about this when we talked about the Verizon pole in the middle of the park, where we do have a lot more say if we're talking about proprietary aspects versus regulatory aspects. I just want to make sure I'm not missing something when it applies to a right-of-way. Is there some quirk of Maryland law?
Keep in mind, right-of-way is owned by the general public. It's not like city-owned parkland.
Okay.
They're completely different. City-owned parkland would be just like we're a private property owner that owns a piece of parcel. Right-of-way is owned collectively and is deeded to the city collectively as the city. It's not the same as a parcel. And in fact, I could not divide up the right-of-way into parcels. They don't have parcel IDs. They don't have any of that. They're really a different entity.
Okay.
I would say that right-of-way is looked at a bit differently. It's not necessarily that it couldn't be proprietary in some circumstances, but again, it is, as Dennis was saying, it is looked at differently.
Okay. So I just want to make sure we're not short-circuiting this discussion looking at regulatory provisions and regulatory case law. Because, for example, FCC Order 14153 doesn't apply in the proprietary capacity. It only applies to us in the regulatory capacity. So, for example, we are talking about a Spectrum Act application. if it's, we have two different analyses that we have to look at unless there are quirks with the right-of-way. So I just, as we go forward, I'd like to talk more about those aspects.
And we'd be happy to provide more detail
Okay,
on that.
great.
Mike, if you have any, we can go right to the public.
I had a question about the monopole. It's 18 inches in diameter. It's not tapered to the top, right? It's all the way up.
16?
I think it's 16.
I'm sorry, 16.
It is tapered. It
inches.
does get narrower.
It does get narrower,
Just like any pole gets narrow at the top.
yeah,
I don't know what the top dimension is, but it does get.
yeah, okay.
16 inches is the larger one.
This is the
Yes.
large, yeah.
And
I
8
believe
inches
it's-
is the thinner one?
Believe so.
No.
All right. Yeah, I don't know if everybody can see it. I don't think, well,
Yeah, it's
now
on
you
the
can look
screen
at the
now.
monitor, you can see the difference there, so, that's,
stand inside of it. So you can see the.
Aaron. The time for the public will come shortly.
I actually had a few more notes, if I could.
go ahead.
And perhaps this leads up to the public comment, and it was mentioned by Frank before, and I just want to state for the record that I'll apply the law appropriately, which means I cannot consider the environmental impacts of RF in making a siting decision. And you can consider, as Frank said before, you can consider whether or not it's compliance with FCC regulations and maximum levels, but there are cases out there where if the public comes up and they introduce a lot of evidence about the RF impacts, then it could disturb the record. So I just want to state, I will not consider that information as these types of applications go forward. I would like to hear more, specific comments of things I'd like to see in the application process. Discussions of indemnification provisions on the part of the persons that are wishing to put facilities onto our rights of way, particularly with respect to the decreases in property values. That is something that we can consider. And then I am very reluctant to cite these in residential neighborhoods. I'm not opposed to it. It's something that obviously you have to consider on a case-by-case basis, but it's going to be a tough sell when they put these applications in.
I also wanted to just add to that, that I think the notice requirement needs to be very robust. So, you talked to Dennis about making sure that someone doesn't come home one day and find one of these on the property line in between two homes. I mean, I think I know that was just a sort of an outline, basic example, but we need to make sure that the notice provisions are such that folks have significant advance notice, not just advance notice. And we might want to consider a slightly larger radius than just, the one or two homes where a potential facility could be located, so that, if a facility is going to affect, a handful of homes or a block, we might want to consider whether it's appropriate to require the applicant notice requirement to be bigger.
Well, that was why I asked about the installation of the fiber optic, because that's actually just as disruptive as having the pole. It could be, and so the notice requirement actually would seem to expanding that at least a radius of 100 feet from the facility, but also from any other disruption that's resulting from the construction would seem to be required for the notice as well.
Keep in mind, we have to treat all utility providers the same, so that requirement would have to be in place for any other utility provider who's doing similar type work in the right-of-way. I'm not sure we have that notification when we're talking about somebody doing new fiber optic in the right-of-way. We cannot have different regulations
So,
apply to different
all right.
aspects. Now, the pole would be a different scenario.
Yeah.
We could do something different for that. I do think it's also important that we set the expectation of what that notification means. Does that mean just notification it will occur, or is there notification that there would be some additional input on part of the property owner? It's very important from a public standpoint that everybody knows what that purpose is for. So somebody doesn't think if they get a notification, if the aspect is it's going to be there, they come in and say, I don't want it to be there. Because it's frustrating, from even myself being a property owner, if you think you have some say in the location, that's different than saying it's just going to occur. So we would need to be very clear about that.
Well, so having had,
You want to hear from the public?
well, yeah, eventually I do. Yeah, I want to hear from the public. So, in my case, we had fiber optic run for Comcast and for Verizon twice, or basically two different times, separate times. Both times they broke an electric line that was part of an invisible fence. You know, and even though I told them that it was there, they broke it. They broke it twice. Two different companies broke it. So, I mean, that kind of notification that's why that's important to, and just the disruption in your daily life is enough. But anyway, I think, you know, everybody else has asked pretty much anything I was going to bring up, so I'm ready to hear from the public.
All right, let's move on to the public. So this is the time when the mayor and council would like to hear from the public on this topic. We ask that you keep your remarks to no more than 3 minutes. When your time is down to 30 seconds, the timer will beep and turn yellow. When your time's up, it'll beep and turn red. Who'd like to be the first speaker? Come on up. And if for next speakers, if we can just form a line behind this lady, as well as anyone from upstairs, although I don't want to pack the room quite. Maybe wait a couple minutes if you're upstairs. But please go ahead. State your name and please start.
Joanna McGinnis. I'm the property owner of 6 Turnham Lane. Good evening, Mayor Ashman and City Council members. We've been living at 6 Turnham Lane for over 27 years, taking care of our property, supporting the city, and paying our high taxes. As a homeowner, I do not deserve to have such an enormous, ugly structure to be placed in my front yard. Not only is it ugly, but it devalues our property and is unsafe. On the evening of Thursday, April 7th, I was notified by Mr. Enslinger that the city is seriously considering the installation of 3 cell facilities in my neighborhood, one of which is in the front yards of 6 and 8 Turnham Lane. Mr. Enslinger provided me with the website with all the information related to the structures, and my husband and I reviewed the available information. It became quickly apparent to us that the city had been working on this issue for several months, if not years. We were never informed nor offered an explanation as to how our development was chosen, and especially the cell tower outside our home, literally next to our bedroom windows. Furthermore, this specific cell tower is very visible to our neighbors at 9, 11, and 13 Turnham Lane. As a homeowner, I request all 3 cell towers be relocated to other more suitable locations outside the Westlake community. If, in the very unfortunate event, the city moves forward with these horrible installations within our community, the cell tower which is currently proposed at the 6-8 Turnham Lane location must be moved to another location. Finally, I ask you, would you like this atrocious structure in your front yard? I suspect the answer is no, so please do not place it in my front yard. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we do understand that we understand the position from the residents. Just in the hopes of keeping this rolling along, we ask that you limit the applause, please. Please, go ahead. Wait.
Clarification question.
Wait. Come to the mic, please.
Ma'am,
Please come to the mic.
The lady before has a written statement.
Yeah,
to
to submit it.
Yes.
Submit it over to you?
Yep, to
To you,
them.
sir.
Yes.
And
And
then-
let me, along those lines, let me just say that anyone who would like to submit testimony in writing, send us an email. That is perfectly fine. It will be considered and made part of the record, just like your oral testimony. Please, go ahead.
Since you've answered some questions, my written statement's going to have changed a bit. But my name is Mary Carlo. I reside, along with my husband and 2 adult children, at 8 Turnham Lane, the site of one of the proposed cell towers. I am speaking here tonight on behalf of my family and as part of the Wesley neighborhood. I am extremely concerned and frustrated about the prospect of the small cell towers being installed in our community, and specifically just 33 feet from the front of my home and on my front yard. Given the 25 foot to 30 foot mentioned, that's of great concern to me, as it would fall very close to my daughter's bedroom. I am also extremely upset about the 4-day notice of this hearing. The late notice was inadequate and poorly reflects this council's concern towards the very citizens who have elected you and who have entrusted our faith that you will advocate for us. One of my many goals tonight is to find out that my initial reaction is false, and that you plan to fight for us and our investments in this community. We have lived here since 1999 and have a great deal invested not only in our property, but in a whole way of life. We've raised our children here, laughed and cried with our neighbors, shared in memories both happy and sad. We've built a life here, and that is no small matter. Please understand that it is imperative that you fight with us to relocate the cell towers outside of our residential community to show us that you value and appreciate the passion and the concern we have regarding this significant change. I understand that you are federally mandated to accept these applications and that you have the ability to influence the locations and designs. I expect that you will seriously take into consideration and act upon the power that you hold and listen to our pleas. I personally want you to know that my family and I are very concerned about how this will impact our lives, both personally and financially. I had more to read, but I have come up with several questions. One is that I've researched this a bit, and there's a difference between total coverage as opposed to the carrier's coverage objectives, i.e. meaning their future outcomes
Please
and
address
customers
us.
and okay, their future outcomes and customers and profit. So it's not just.
No, you still have 30 seconds.
Okay, great. I'm sorry. The second thing is the poles in our front yards are not consistent with all the other light fixtures. Two, you mentioned ground construction, and I'm still pulling out weeds from about 3 years ago that were never there. So I'm concerned about safety and not happy about all these different subcontractors coming into our neighborhood. We have a very safe, close-knit neighborhood. Also, has the city been doing any preliminary work on the street to help facilitate this location? And are you personally insured and protected if down the road we experience negative consequences to our health and to our finances? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mary, before you go, please submit those if you can. I'm sure Dennis was taking notes, but if you can, send that in email, and we'll try to get responses to all those questions. Okay, next speaker, please.
Hey, I'm Mark Isaacson. I just want to take a little different bent on this. I run I'm just really interested in the health piece of this and making sure that gets out to folks. So I run an integrated pharmacy, Village Green Apothecary in Bethesda, Maryland. So we've got thousands and thousands of customers all over the region. And I can tell you, we actually did a radio show on this particular topic, EMFs. So I mean, that can be found at myvillagegreen.com if anyone wants to listen to it. But we had a world-class expert talk about EMFs. And it is, I knew a lot about this, but it wasn't until I listened to that radio show. It is just shocking, the amount of data that's out there. And I just wanted to mention a couple interesting points just related to this. So we literally have our cells that are designed at a certain level to optimize our cells, and it's really in the range of like 0.5 to 25 hertz. So when you look at EMFs, whether you're looking at cell phone, cell towers, I mean, you're talking about multiple times the energy that our optimal cells are designed to be at. So it's really a significant thing. So that's one. Second thing is, you can go to, there's another site that I think folks would find of value called EMFanalysis.com. So there's just thousands of studies there. But there's literally 2,300 studies done by the US Navy showing the biological impact of EMFs, electromagnetic fields. So this is kind of the whole realm of everything going on, whether it's cell towers, cell phones, computers, etc. And the last thing, just to keep this as short as possible, that I think is of relevancy is I have an 11-year-old daughter, and we live in Washingtonian Woods. And, you know, I know it's early on, but there's a proposed site for one of these towers that would be literally just up a house from us. So she actually has childhood benign epilepsy. And we know, we've gone through the whole medical process, and we've got many, many doctors that have talked about EMFs, specifically talked about Wi-Fi, specifically talked about keeping our Wi-Fi off at night. So to have the risk of a tower or something that would be close by that we couldn't effectively turn off at night is just a huge risk factor. And I just want to make sure that everyone understands that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, Could I just point out, that's the type of testimony we cannot consider legally in our decisions in this realm.
Right.
Okay. Lisa, please.
You're going to hear a little bit more of it. Not a lot, but a little
Okay.
bit, because I think it is relevant. My name is Lisa Klein. I live at 420 Upshire Circle, also in Washingtonian Woods. When residents in Astoria, New York, complained about a cell tower near a recreational area, birds were dying from the radiation. Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney asked the FCC inspectors to investigate to see if radiation levels were too high. The day before the inspectors were to arrive, the problems were acknowledged, and the tower was immediately removed that day. A Poplar Point, Maryland resident battled Sprint to remove successfully a cell tower that destroyed the character of the community. Similar stories in Jacksonville, Florida, and Spartansburg, South Carolina. I'm here tonight to oppose applications of small cell facilities in all residential areas in Gaithersburg, and here's why. While the Telecom Act of 1996 limits us in many ways, Congress expressly preserves local zoning authority. Section 332C7 gives the city the right to deny an application as long as it's in writing and supported by evidence. So let's not talk about what we can't do. Let's talk about what we can do. We can adopt strict setback requirements for all applications that would prohibit towers within 500 feet of homes, schools, certainly playgrounds. And they did this successfully in 1998 in Spartansburg, South Carolina. It's a great case study. We can also advocate heavily for alternate site analyses on all applications. Carriers are required to prove there's nowhere else to put the site. Wireless carriers must also list all the adverse effects of towers, including the aesthetic ones. One community even hired an arborist to show how many trees would die around a proposed tower. At a minimum, these measures draw out the process. One source that I read said these carriers will flip to another site when they run into resistance. Hint, hint. So the two prototypes that are in Washingtonian Woods happen to be one of them near a tot lot. So this is when I will remind the council that electromagnetic radiation is a Class 2B carcinogen as per the World Health Organization. The negative health impacts of continuous and prolonged exposure are conclusive, if not yet acknowledged by the FCC, though even they are reevaluating the data as we speak. Other public safety concerns include the collapse of towers. Some have caught fire. And then there's the 21% ding to real estate values. I'll leave it at that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lisa. Please, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Stephen Rayfield. I live at 37 Treeworthy in Wesley. I'm here today to talk as a private citizen and a resident of Gaithersburg, though my profession is as an RF engineer, and I've served as a consultant in the district and in support of federal regulations, including the IEEE standard for electromagnetic radiation. So I'm very familiar with those. Anyway, what I'd like to start off with is giving you a topographic map which will show that where they're trying to locate the antennas in both Wesley and in the adjacent neighborhood is below the threshold level of the park that's in between. That used to be Consumer Product Safety Protection, and before that it was a Nike base. But for antenna location purposes, that would be far preferable and would give you better coverage. So I'd like to...
Yeah, just hand it to Dennis. Thank you.
The next exhibits I'd like to give you are a survey of 4 mile radius of Wesley showing 289 transmitters for cell phones. They're on 89 towers and the itemized list is attached. So when you look at what's really out there, it's the cumulative effect, not of any one tower, but the noise floor for the entire population is being raised by the summation of all of the electromagnetic radiation. So if you look at the standards, they only talk to a single transmitter They never talk about the sum of the radiation. And Mr. Wu, I know you had asked a few questions along that line, and I'll volunteer to give you some pro bono info to follow up on that. So I'll submit these. One of the things that happened a number of years ago in Wesley was one of the houses across the street, matter of fact, right adjacent to where you're proposing one of the towers, was actually hit by lightning. So one of the questions I would have is, what kind of lightning protection and how will that affect my homeowner's assurance, knowing that there is a tower within 100 feet of my house? I have a whole number of other questions, and I'll submit them in writing to you.
Okay.
But there's a lot more to this story than what has been brought out by Crown Castle. Crown Castle owns and builds towers and then tries to sell those towers or access to the services to the various cell phone companies, quite often as package deals.
All right, we'll take the rest in writing,
Yes,
please.
sir.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Shayan Zalodin. I'm at 7 Thorburn Road in Wesley. I'm not an RF engineer. I'm not a health professional at all. What I am is an expert in housing finance. I've had a 15-year career, 12 years at Fannie Mae. I currently run a mortgage company, a mortgage services company, and home values are something that I study and have studied for a very long time. I've really only learned about this about 2 days ago, so I wasn't able to put together my own study, but I can tell you that I've looked at it on the internet, and there's a couple of studies out there. One that was done by the School of Business and Economics at the University of Kentucky that establishes that houses located within 500 feet of a cell tower tend to retail for 7.5% less than similar houses outside of an affected range of a cell tower. That affected range actually doesn't diminish until you're about 4,500 feet away from said cell tower. So we're talking about every house in Wesley, in Washingtonian Woods, many of the houses in the Kentlands are all going to be subject to this home price depreciation. In my small enclave in Wesley, 207 homes, our average home price, according to public records, is about $650,000. What we're talking about here is $10 million in wealth destruction that is on the table under Crown Castle's proposal. $10 million, in excess of $10 million. So, you know, I don't know about everybody else here, but finance is what I do, and I'd be looking for some compensation in this regard at the very least. There was a survey by the National Institutes of Science, Law, and Public Policy done, and by the way, that University of Kentucky study was just, it's barely a year old. It was released at the end of last March. So it's very timely information. NISLAP put out a 2014 survey that found that 94% of home buyers are less interested and would pay less for a property located near a cell tower. 79% said that under no circumstances would they ever purchase a rental property within a few blocks of a cell antenna. And almost 90% of those that were concerned about the increasing number of cell phone towers in the residential neighborhoods, even among people that had never really heard of the potential health effects. Having made my career in financial services, specifically in mortgage finance, I can tell you that markets react to perception with every bit as much vigor as they do to facts. And the show of people and emotions that we've seen today is a testament to the fact that this perception already exists. So the impact, the negative impact that that most people here are worried about in their home prices, it's an almost certainty because we're already dealing with the facts on the ground, and this has been something that has been exhibited across the country many times over. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, quick question.
Yeah. Oh, I brought some testimony, so
Can I just ask you a quick question? I don't know if you know this. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but of the studies that you looked at, do you know if they were dealing with the larger traditional cell towers or small ones as well?
The UK study was done on small cell towers.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Mayor, can I ask a question of Dennis? Is that something that we're looking at in the application process or thinking about looking at is the economic impact on the neighborhoods, devaluation of properties?
I'm not aware of any community that looks at that particular aspect.
Because that is something we can consider in our decisions according to the case law.
Okay, next speaker.
Hi. Thank you, Mr. Wu, for bringing that up. I'm not a financial planner. I don't have a health background, but I am a lawyer. And what I'm thinking about is this feels like you're taking my property and giving me nothing in return, and somebody's pockets are getting lined and it's not mine or any of my neighbors. So I'd like the city to tell me, and if you can't tell me today, I get that now, but I'd like the city to state the factors that it's going to use to determine when a said cell tower is going to be erected and explain specifically why these environmental concerns are not allowed. I understand the FCC part, I get the law, that part I get. But your own ordinances, the ones that we got the presentation about, particularly under section 24 of the city's state, the city council is authorized to hear and decide conditional use permits for towers and may approve the use upon the affirmative findings if the proposed structure will not endanger the health and safety of residents. Well, what we're talking about is health and safety. So maybe that's not environmental, but health and safety is just as important. Similarly, it also talks about the fact that the proposed structure has to not prove detrimental to neighboring properties or to the neighborhood. Well, we're also talking about that. So I'm really hoping you're gonna show us and explain to us very clearly before these applications start rolling in and start being reviewed, how that's gonna happen. Because I didn't hear anything tonight that explained that to me. All I hear is, we're looking at prototypes, we're looking at applications, and we're ready to get started. I don't even think there's a need for this, and I feel like most of the people in the neighborhood don't feel like we need better cell coverage. We don't even think we need what's being offered, but we're being told we have to have it, and how we're gonna get it. It's as if we put the cart before the horse. The other issue that I'm concerned about is it basically talks about the fact that, again, in section 24, it says it requires for every foot of height of a tower placed in a right-of-way, the base tower itself must be a foot from all adjoining residential properties. Well, when there were discussions about the height, if the right-of-way is only 6 feet or 30 feet, and the height that we were talking about on average was 25 feet, I don't understand how we're gonna meet these requirements in your own ordinances if it's a foot for a foot for a foot. Some of this doesn't make sense. If we're actually wrote these ordinances recently to change them to take care of this, then why are we saying the average height's gonna be 25 feet and the average right of way is nowhere near 25 feet and we can't get 25 feet away if the average height's gonna be, none of this is making any sense. I feel like the explanations are not here yet and we need more explanation before you come out with a presentation like this. And I'm wondering if additional modifications are gonna be made to the city ordinances before you start processing these applications. If you're saying the average height's gonna be 25 feet, but you're also saying it's gonna be 1 foot.
Thank you. Any further testimony? And I'll just note for anybody upstairs, this would be a good time to come down and line up. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. After 40 years the Wesley has been in existence, we just learned last Thursday night from Mr.
Sorry,
Esslinger.
can you state your name, please?
I'm sorry. I went straight to the...
That's okay.
Can you reset your clock? Start all over again?
Please, go ahead. State your name.
Thank you. My name is Vasilios McGinnis. Sorry my French accent, but I think I'm going to get it right.
Okay, go right ahead.
Thank you, sir. After 40 years, last Thursday we learned some sad news in the history of development. After living 30 years, raising kids, raising a family, from Mr. Dennis Slinger, called my wife and I said, you know something? You have a nice tower coming in front of your house. I said, is that right? How so? No one from the city from the Wesley developer knew anything about what you have in works for several months. There are plans that you have presented tonight that show work since beginning of the year that we were not aware of. I don't know why. The Wesley development has been in existence for 40 years. It's a quiet residential development, as you all know, and has been very loyal to City of Gettysburg, very supportive to City of Gettysburg, and very supportive to all of you. Why now, after 40 years paying these high taxes, deserves to do that? Last minute and over the weekend, we all came together as one voice. 148 signatures as a petition were collected representing 76% of the residents. And all the residents of the Wesley with one voice say to you, we, the residents of the Wesley development, strongly oppose the installation of such facilities as they devalue our properties, are unsafe, are visual appalling, and do not belong in our small residential development. Your consideration and action with this matter is greatly appreciated. We are here to help you and work with you, but we're going to stand behind our values, safety of our children, property values, for all these years and so many decades that we have cherished. I'm very glad to hear tonight Mr. Wu, who had some very good questions, and Mr. Spiegel, and all of you, to thinking just outside of the box. Do the residents want this thing? The answer is no, we don't. For that reason, these 148 signatures and more to come in the next few days as the residents become available will be submitted to you if that matters to you for the community that you serve. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Aaron Rosenzweig. I live in Wesley, the place you want to install 3 cell towers on our front lawns. There are 2 more you want to install in our neighboring Washingtonian woods for a total of 5. Council members, there are 5 of you plus our mayor. I'm suggesting you take those 5 cell towers and place them on your front lawns before you allow this to happen to any citizen of Gaithersburg. Would you do that? Do you love our neighbors so much to volunteer your own home first before all others? You want us to believe that your hands are tied and the federal government has forced this upon us. That's a lie. There is much you can do if you put your heart to it. As our council, you have 3 responsibilities. 1, keep us safe. 2, fix our roads. 3, stop. Really, number 3 is stop. Just get out of the way and let us be. Today, you are failing on number 1. You are not keeping us safe. You aren't even trying. Right now, Montgomery County is suing the FCC about these cell towers. Right now, there is a man with a 65-foot cell tower on his front lawn in Montgomery County. The county is suing because it is unconstitutional. The federal government does not have the right to force utilities upon us. The sad part about this is that Gaithersburg does not have the county's back. We have not helped fund the lawsuit. Instead, the county has joined forces with other municipalities in California and Texas. Shame on you for not lending a hand. Effective immediately, you will, 1, educate yourselves by reading all the details about small cell towers on teamgaithersburg.org. 2, join the legal fight against the FCC. We can stall the rollout on grounds of constitutional violations. 3, demand that the cell towers be moved to other locations, such as the Nike missile site. Keep picking alternate locations. Fight. 4, implement municipal Wi-Fi. Free or reduced price internet for all citizens. Far less radiation and virtually invisible installations. Smartphones are moving to Wi-Fi first anyway. Cell towers are outdated. These can be installed anywhere, even on wires overhead. My phone is the latest Android. I pay less than $15 a month, including taxes. Unlimited voice, unlimited text. Wi-Fi first. When I leave, I connect to the cell. And Dennis has admitted to us that these towers are data only. They're not even used for voice. We have Fios already in our homes. We have 0 use for these devices, yet they're being forced upon us. Fight, fight, fight. Thank you.
I want to ask the city attorney to comment on the Montgomery
Okay,
County
okay.
lawsuit, but I don't know if you have another comment you wanted to make.
Yeah, actually, that was the comment I did want to make. The Montgomery County lawsuit resulted in a judgment against Montgomery County and the other jurisdictions that participated in that. There was a motion for rehearing that was denied, and all appeal periods have expired, so there's no further appeal in that case.
Next speaker, please.
My name is Shelley Pine. I live at 35 Treeworthy in the Wesley community. And there is a real issue about location. I want to talk about law. I'm a regulatory lawyer also, and had this afternoon to do a bunch of research on this. It's not what I would do ordinarily, but I think I can shed some light on some of the issues and address some of the concerns that Councilmember Wu and Councilmember Spiegel raised. I do believe that the law affords us more discretion than staff believes at the current moment, or at least what I believe I hear. But I also want to thank both Dennis and Lynn, who were extremely courteous. I called them both this afternoon. They called me back, spent a long time on the phone with me, and gave me a lot of background. So they were very courteous and helpful. The problem is, of course, this is a really big issue, and when you guys come to decisions on this, I understand this is a working meeting. I think basic due process requires that you provide us fair notice and an opportunity to be heard. The reason why you have the crowd you have here today is one or two very concerned direct homeowners spent their weekend walking house to house, every home in our community. That's not the way due process and fair notice should be done. There should be a mailing, as there was about the recent proposed zoning change. We all got postcards. There should be a mailing to every house before a decision is taken, so we know what the agenda is, we know what's going to take place, and we know exactly what issues are to be presented. And just having a posting on the website is not enough. But let me go directly to the question that I think, especially you, Robert, were asking, is what's the scope of our discretion? And I'd like to bore you for 1 minute by reading one sentence out of the Wireless Act, the 2012 statute that was part of that middle class tax relief statute. It says, notwithstanding section blah, 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 of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, or any other provision of law, a state or local government may not deny and shall approve any eligible facilities request for a modification of an existing wireless tower or base station. Emphasize, an existing wireless tower or base station that does not substantially change the physical dimensions of such tower or base station. And it defines in the very next section an eligible facility request to mean any request for modification of an existing wireless tower or base station that involves co-location of new equipment, removal or replacement of other transmission equipment. Well, if you look at this presentation, look at slides 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, 17, it's all about new poles. It's knocking out the existing stuff and putting in brand new poles. I say the language of the statute is very clear, and it's not contradicted. And I think y'all ought to read the case. I think it's an important decision, the Fourth Circuit case, and especially you're the lawyer up here. You're a lawyer.
I'm a lawyer too.
You're the
I
lawyer.
read the case.
Let me give you the citation.
No. Why don't you submit it in writing? Frank and Lynn, do you want to speak to the legal point? And then Dennis, I want to have you speak to the notification.
And I just want to mention, I did raise this exact question a few days ago via email with staff.
And you raised a question, of location and discretion. And the idea that was put forward that if they want to put it in a residential community, they can do so, and we have no choice. That's nonsense. That is nonsense.
Okay, let's.
Can I yield my minutes to Cheryl?
I
have more to say.
Excuse me. All right, I appreciate it. You please submit it in writing. We have a lot of speakers tonight.
Well, I
Lynn and
spent all
Frank.
day researching this. I have a full-time job.
If you could please respect the rules of order here.
Sure, I will.
Thank you. Lynn and Frank.
Yeah, we could go through the different paragraphs in the FCC order, because it does come down to the specific definition of base station, which is fairly broad. It also comes down to the definition of co-location, which can be fairly broad as well. So those have to be reviewed based on what the specific application is. It's true that there are some areas where the language in the law, if there is no current wireless installation at all, that there can be arguably more discretion in the local government. But that also this presentation right now is focused on one neighborhood. That's not necessarily going to be the case all around. It's also not going to be the case that you're necessarily having to replace a pole with something else, because in some areas of the city, the poles are of sufficient size. So I'm just saying, it does depend on the specific application that we're dealing with. There could be an issue there, but we will have to take a more specific look based on what we're actually looking at.
Dennis, do you want to talk about notification?
I mean, for work sessions, we typically, this is not a public hearing item. I think sometimes that gets confused because we try to use real-life examples, but one of the reasons we use real-life examples is we wanted everybody to really have a good understanding of what this meant. This does apply, or this could apply, to every property, residential property in the city of Gaithersburg. So I don't believe there's been a time that we've sent a notice to every property. We've done different things. For instance, we have the magazine that comes out. We often have done items in that. But sometimes we don't have time in terms of the publication deadlines to do that. So
All right.
we really did try to do as much outreach as we possibly could regarding this.
If I can, excuse me. I would ask that everyone please respect the rules of order here.
Not related to specific properties, because we aren't looking at specific properties with this work session. This is a general work session to look at how do we implement small cells.
Okay, I got the answer. So let me just pipe in here. I happen to know that we put out a press release on this issue. It went out in our weekly e-newsletter. We sent it out proactively to every HOA in the city and condo association.
Please respect the rules of the hearing. Do not interrupt the mayor, please.
With the intent that the HOAs distribute, we put it out on all of our social media channels. And when it was unusual to see in a work session background material, when there's not an application before us, to see specific addresses listed. When we recognize, when we as council members and myself recognize that specific addresses were referenced, we asked that staff contact them directly, just so everybody was aware. So we don't have a Gazette anymore, unfortunately, but through the channels that we have, through every channel that we have at our disposal, we did put this out, understanding that this would be a potentially difficult issue, not only for your neighborhoods, but for every neighborhood in the city. Please, next speaker.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm short. Okay, and I have heels on. My name is Toby Salahuddin, and I reside at 7 Thorburn Road. I just want to thank the council for letting us speak this evening, and I also want to give a shout out to my amazing neighbors who came out in force this evening. I have found that through this talk, I have more questions really than I do answers, so I want to address a couple things. First thing, just real quick, in your response to HOA, Wesley does not have an HOA, so therefore we could not be contacted that way, and no letters were sent, and that's why I think my neighbors were upset at that, at least from Wesley's point of view. So my questions are, how did Crown Castle come up with the residential locations? There was no information about that.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
I'm stopping the time. We can get you can please ask all the questions, and we will try to, if
That's
you
fine.
leave contact information with staff, we will try to get information
No
back out to
worries.
you. Okay.
I just wanted them mentioned.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Also, I believe the gentleman who spoke before me mentioned that someone here, the gentleman to my right, second gentleman to my right, mentioned that we could not move utilities outside of a residential area. And I'm wondering why that is the case, that we, again, have no way of doing that. Also, the assistant attorney mentioned that there's some basis for denial can be stealth. I was unclear as to what he means by that. So if you can elaborate on that. I recently noticed that there were small towers that were added to the old veterinarian building at 15021 DeFeef Mill Road. And I'm wondering why, again, the Crown Castle feel the need. I mean, that's literally, that's on Route 28, across from Washingtonian Woods. And they're on the big silos there. There's definitely a lot of them. And so I'm wondering why we feel the need to add them right across the street. And if the FCC makes it difficult to deny any utility company coming into residential areas, when does that stop? When do we have the right to say no? Or is it going to be, Crown Castle today, another Verizon company tomorrow, another one Comcast the next day? At what point do we get to say enough is enough? So those are my questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi. My name is Roger Seifert. I live in Wesley at 115 Manette Court. And I do also appreciate being able to talk to Dennis this afternoon and Ollie in detail. It was very helpful. I discussed with them, and I have already sent emails on this, so this is specifically in the record, but I have to respectfully disagree with some of the things they've said legally. I'm not a lawyer, but I think the city attorney should opine on this in writing so that all these folks in our community can see this. Anyway, I discussed what I believe are the governing, quote, terms and provisions of certain public utility easements, which I understand to apply to the Wesley community. And they requested I send an email, which I did. I believe that these easements do not in any way recognize nor permit above-ground communication equipment or systems in the Wesley community. Those, quote, terms and provisions and agreements are recorded in Montgomery County Land Records at LIBOR 3834 folio 457 through 462, and I have a copy that I will provide. They were recorded in the Montgomery County Clerk's office on February 19th, 1969. The recorded deed to my home, and I think everybody's home that's from Wesley here, indicates that my lot and in the subdivision is known as Plat 7 Wesley and was duly recorded among the land records in that same book and in Book 108, Plat 12523. My title insurance company notes that the 10-foot public easement as shown on the recorded plat, and that a declaration of easements listed on the title of the title insurance, they're recorded in that same LIBOR 3834 folio 457, were adopted and they're recorded on the plat. This to me appears to be the governing legal documents regarding this situation. The public utility easements are only grants to public utilities, specifically Potomac Electric Power Company, Washington Gas Light, and Potomac Edison Company, as far as I can see. The public utility easement grants are not to the city of Gaithersburg. That title is not anywhere in those easements that everybody that was granted before, when we got this land, or was granted before we got the land. The grants are for three specific things. A, underground electric power and energy transmission and distribution facilities. B, underground communication wires, cables, and appurtenant equipment, and associated above-ground junction pedestals, terminals, and appurtenant equipment. And then C, gas transmission distribution facilities. Well, we never got the natural gas, even though it's low now. But anyway, it seems to me that Section B of these public utility easements is the most important section regarding the proposed matter of Gaithersburg, possibly granting the ability for telecom providers to construct, operate, and maintain, say, 35-foot tall cell communication towers in Wesley. Per Webster's, the tall tower would not really seem to be an appurtenance, which is an incidental right attached to a principal property right or a subordinate part of an adjunct or accessory object. The tall tower, perhaps some of them 16 or more inches in
Roger,
diameter.
how much more you got there?
There's about two more paragraphs.
Well,
if I could.
I think we
You get the
understand the
drift.
point, and if you submit it in writing.
Yeah, I did submit it in writing. But I
Okay.
think they should opine in writing to tell people why these documents, which limit access to this, don't apply in this situation, because you're going to grant something to somebody that your name is not on in the legal documents that are for our land.
We understand. Go ahead, Ron.
Can I just want to ask staff a question about that. There's a difference between an easement on private property and a right-of-way, right?
Yes. To be specific, there are actually easements in every community which are separate instruments, which actually are an easement. So the underlying property owner still owns that property. There's just an easement.
Right.
So
right-of-way is completely different.
Right. So
The underlying property owner is not owned. The underlying property is not owned by the adjacent property.
So Ollie talked about, the end of the sidewalk to the end of the sidewalk. So my property, just to take one for example, and by the way, I'm the only one
Okay.
up here who lives in one of the two communities being discussed tonight. My property sort of starts, and presumably on the back side of the sidewalk. Up to the edge of the back edge of the sidewalk is the city's right-of-way. And then starting at my property, going in several feet, on my property, there is an easement for Verizon or Comcast to come in and put some
Right.
wires under my property. But that's different than the property we're talking about, which is the
Well,
right-of-way
the easements where they're
next
gonna
to
put
that.
this stuff, they've already put Verizon supposedly.
Right, so I'm
The
just
only
trying
right
to,
of
I'm
way
just,
there is the sidewalk.
I'm just trying to help
Excuse me.
clarify. No, that's all right. I'm just trying to
Yeah.
help clarify. So maybe that helps answer your question. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the easement
Yeah.
on your property is different than the right-of-way property, which is in the public domain, right?
Okay, we're gonna, thank you, Roger.
Okay.
We'll have to correspond, right, or over the phone, or in
Sure.
person.
So, Mr. Mayor, just to be clear, we're talking about placement in right-of-ways here, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, right, front right away.
Mr. Mayor, just very briefly, I'm
Yes.
sorry to interrupt, but somebody had asked about what I meant by stealth, and that's a very simple answer. What I was referring to is that under some circumstances, if there is currently a stealth requirement in place, what that means is that the equipment be concealed, that can be kept in place, and that can be considered for any new installation as well. My point also to that was related to the visual impact that could also very largely be considered. So,
Okay,
just to answer that question.
thank you. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for letting me change hats from the subcommittee to myself as president of the Saybrook Homeowners Association. While Saybrook is not being targeted currently, we stand in support with our neighbors from Wesley and our other friends who are being affected by this. I also would like to challenge the status of the petitioner as a utility. It doesn't sound like they are actually a recognized utility, but rather a company that wants to get the business of a utility. And do they have standing to claim the authority that they're requesting by the FCC here? Some of the things that came up that were kind of concerning, especially the recommendation that entire poles be owned by the provider that they're petitioning, basically outsourcing the light poles. That makes me very concerned. If there are any issues with light poles through storm damage or whatever, are we now not able to come to the city to get that repaired? Are we having to go to whoever is now owning this light pole because they've got a tower on the top to get that replaced? Thank you, Councilman Spiegel, for bringing the issue of notification up, and through the whole process and pre-process, it wasn't until the very end that even notification came up, and that was certainly concerning. When there are simple zoning changes being requested, there's a public notice, there's a placard sitting out for weeks before a public hearing is held, and it seems like something that would affect as many people as this would rise to the level that a public hearing would be warranted. I know it seems like the federal law is tying our hands here. But my question, again, I know we talked about the Montgomery County case that I wasn't aware of, but what is the city's exposure if we were to repeatedly deny some of these residential requests? Are they going to sue the city? And if so, does that give us standing to then challenge the statute in a more specific case versus possibly, and I'm not familiar with the county situation, but using the situation of whatever the denial might be might allow us a further chance to challenge the standing of the particular petitioner or just the statute in general to be able to impose these kind of regulations on the cities, and perhaps the Council of Cities might join in that challenge, because obviously Gaithersburg isn't going to be the only place that this is going to become an issue for. I would love to see, if this does have to happen, preventing any monopoles that would have any kind of box on the side. I mean, obviously, I know you want to make it as minimal as possible, but I just wanted to put that on the record. I know where these have cropped up in Los Angeles, they're often attached to traffic lights. I didn't know what they were until today, but as soon as I heard this conversation, I realized what they were. But with the city's ability to limit, is there a way to set a maximum concentration in a particular area, neighborhood, so one area is not getting picked on?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further? You don't.
Jim, I did also want to note that I think the National League of Cities was actually either a party to or an amicus. They submitted a brief in support of Montgomery County and the other cities in that case, and they lost. So,
Next speaker, please.
Hi, I'm Margot Rayfield. I live at 37 Treeworthy Road. I have a lot of things to say that have already been said, so I'm just going to focus on the aesthetics. Our community is beautiful, and one of the things that has made it so beautiful is that we don't have ugly poles sticking out of the ground. We have suffered through our lawns being chopped up once, twice, maybe even 3 times. We can do that. If it needs to be put in there, put it underground, or wait 5 years, the technology will change.
Please.
How you doing? My name is Jacob Bravik. I live at 107 Driscoll Way in Washingtonian Woods. The one picture that they put up of the cell tower is at the top of my street, and it's right next to the tot lot, as other people have mentioned, where my 2 small children and nieces and nephews and everybody plays. And I got to tell you, not wild about the idea of it being there, but I drove by while the people from the company were surveying the land and putting everything up, and I stopped my car with my family and I said, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" And they said, "Oh, nothing, we're not doing anything here." And I said, "Well, that's clearly not true, you're doing something." And they said, "Oh, nothing really to talk about." So the idea of, I'm sure the gentleman who was doing the surveying himself wasn't in any position of authority or to say anything, but that left a bad taste in my mouth to begin with. Another thing I wanted to mention was this gentleman here said that the poles can accommodate up to 3 providers, and they would all have to attach their own cables. I know nothing about electronics, so it doesn't matter. But if they all don't, my one question for that is, if they all don't go into the tower at the same time, are they going to have to tear it up and do it 3 times or anything? That's just my one question as far as that was concerned. And lastly, as far as ownership of the poles being with the private entities, I know trying to get answers from AT&T, Verizon, and Comcast is like pulling teeth. So if something does happen negatively with the weather or just service in general, I imagine trying to get some help from these people isn't going to be as easy as getting help from the city. So those are just a few things I want to bring up. Thank you.
My name is Sylvia Bradley. I live in Wesley, 33 Running Ridge, and I'm just your average citizen. I have a starting family, I have small kids, and this thing is going behind the yard, behind mine, so I can see it right there. And I just want to voice my discontent with what's happening. This is supposed to be something that's for us. That's what they're selling. We're going to get better data. We're going to get faster internet. But we don't want it. We have perfect internet where we are. You can ask anybody here. We don't have dead zones. Wesley is covered. We're good. We don't want this near our family, near my babies. We just don't want this here, and I wanted to state my opinion. I also talked to my real estate agent who has 20 plus years of experience. He grew up here. He knows this. He doesn't live in Wesley. He's not personally involved. He told me this will absolutely damage your property value. There's no question about it. That's just not fair. I'm asking you to represent me and help me and my family as a citizen of Gaithersburg. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
My name is Bob Mitchell. I live at 13 Turnham Court. I was thinking about the first bullet on the presentation, which said that we did not have the right to prohibit the provision of cellular services. Well, the fact of the matter is that we're awash in cellular services. We have all that we need and all that we want. Why can't we say that we have all the provision we want? We have it by method A, we have it by method A, B, and we have it by method C, but you're trying to come in and give it to me by method D, and we don't want method D. We're not prohibiting the provision of cellular services. So we could say to the new provider, you can put in your pole, but you also need to give us an app to put on our device so that we can check a little box which says, don't use that pole. So that way, all the people within the vicinity of the pole could absolutely not use it, and they would have zero volume on it. And I suspect that at that point, they would decide they didn't want to put in the pole. Thank you.
My name is Darlene Bell Zuccarelli, and I think I'm in the 1% of the people who don't have a cell phone. And so today, I wish I had a cell phone, or I would have called my mom and dad, because Verizon approached them about putting a cell tower on their property in Virginia. They have a farm that has about 200 or 300 acres of land, and it's on top of the Blue Ridge Mountain. My parents said no, and so as of today, we have no Verizon cell tower. My issue is really not with the cell towers. It's really, there's something that happened here. For the last 2 years.
Darlene, will you pull? Yeah, there you go. There you go. Go ahead.
For the last almost 2 years, I have come to every meeting. I've missed one meeting in almost 2 years. And I don't ever remember talking about small towers in any of those meetings up until last week. So I was surprised to see all these.
Darlene, address, yeah.
Surprised to see that no one knew about this, not even me, until I get a phone call that says these folks got letters saying that they're going to be putting cell towers in their yards. There was no conversation about small cell towers in this room in the last 12 months. So I think you guys need to do better to communication to the public about what you're doing and when you're doing it, because this conversation about these small towers has not happened, and I have not missed a meeting in almost 2 years. I've been to more meetings than any of you have been to. I've not missed. All right, so thank you.
Hi, my name is Eric Stein. I live at 4th Thorburn Court. No plans to put one of these towers in my front yard as far as I know. But I did want to address a comment that I've heard early on that I think is fallacious, and some things that are sort of gone unsaid but are believed, and that is the notion that this technology is somehow needed in order to plan for future capacity. Because think about this for a second. We know that what they address is data capacity over cell phones. Now, in a mature neighborhood like Wesley, we've got north of a couple hundred homes there with their 3.7 people and their 6.8 Wi-Fi enabled devices and a couple of cell phones. I've got a cell phone, wife's got a cell phone, daughter has a cell phone. But you know what? The demand on cell phone frequencies is not going to increase significantly in a mature neighborhood, because all the additional traffic is going to come through Internet of Things devices, new televisions that talk internet, thermostats, all that kind of thing. All that stuff goes over landlines out of the neighborhood. It does not go over cell phones. So there's going to be some increase, but nothing that really warrants that degree of demand. So given that there has to be a balance between, public welfare, public demand for things, and public objection to things, with the rights of utilities and enterprises to make investments and so on, that you folks and others are put in the position of balancing, I have to ask whether or not the public objections to this experiment, it's been described as a prototype, I believe, that the public objections to this experiment with a technology that is not needed or desired, or I think anybody could even forecast a need for in a residential neighborhood, would be outweighed. We really maybe want to find a different place for them to conduct that prototype. And I'd be very interested in finding out what it is that they would like to learn from that prototype. And if anybody happens to know, I'd sure like to hear that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dennis, let me ask you this. There have been several questions raised this evening about what is the company, Crown Castle? What their justification is for the location and for wanting to put service in one area versus another. As part of the application that they put into the city, I'm assuming that they
actually haven't applied yet.
There is no application.
No, I understand that. Okay, assuming that they will form, our application, does it ask these questions?
Yes, it does ask why they're asking for these services.
Okay.
And why the locations that they picked are needed.
And to what degree does the public have access to that information?
If directed, we could create a project page or have somebody, ask for that information for each of those applications. Again, it's really important to make sure we have an understanding of, once you provide the information, what's the input for the public? Is it purely informational purposes that they're going to know about where these are going to go, or is there some impact they can have on the locations? And part of that will be driven by the timeline that we have to review it. So we can work some process in, but in some cases, we're not going to have a lot of time in terms of general time about, so it's not at number 4. Does that mean we can move it to number 8? And number 8's going to be okay with that? I do think we need to set some expectation of, so what's the information going to be used for? Is it just informational purposes, or are we trying to work it into a process?
So I think our, and after I'm not sure we've heard from all of the public yet, but after this moving forward, I think our next step is to receive some consultation from our legal team about a lot of these specific questions that I'm sure we all agree we want to know the answers to, and want to know the real parameters of our authority here, and what potential there is to whatever, to either expand or comply or whatever. So I think that's definitely our next step. Do we have any further speakers? Come on, please come to the microphone.
A little late, but appreciate it.
Sure.
My name's John Wright. I live in Wesley on Thorburn Road. Everything seems to be pretty much addressed. It seems to be a lot of unanswered questions. I've got a few of those too. How come Washingtonian Woods and Wesley was targeted? Who decided that we didn't have the internet coverage, the Wi-Fi coverage that who deemed as necessary? Does the Kentlands have all the Wi-Fi that they need? Does the Lakelands have? How come they weren't targeted? I haven't heard anything mentioned about them. Do they already have towers in their neighborhoods?
Do you want to ask all your questions and we'll
Well,
respond?
that's one of my questions.
Please, go ahead.
Another concern I have is I've been in Wesley about 30 years now. I've been living the dream. I'm self-employed. I try to pay my house off. That's my retirement. And what I'm hearing now is that I'm deemed to lose 7.5%, 8% of the property values when I go to sell. And that, on top of that, I say Lega wants to raise the property taxes 8%. So I'm looking at about a 15, 16% cut when I want to retire, if I want to sell my house a year or 2 years down the road. Every time I turn around, everybody wants to take. And they're taking and taking. I mean, I'm self-employed. $2,000 a month health care for me. And then another 15% hit on top of this. Another thing, on one of the PowerPoint presentations that you all gave earlier, and I might misread that or misinterpreted that, but there was something in there that it looked to me like if this goes through and it's all said and done, that will give you all, the city council, authority if another tower, 2 towers, 3 towers is deemed necessary in the future, you all can approve that without any due process. So am I correct in that analysis of that PowerPoint?
What staff is recommending is that staff wants to do this as a staff approval as opposed to having it come through to the mayor and city council.
So in 4 years, if this goes through...
Were you done with all your questions?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. The reason why they wanted it, they gave us, and we're going to have to consider it, is because of what they call these shot clocks, where we have a certain amount of time whether to approve or deny the applications that come before us based on the federal law. it's a time, it costs a lot of time in the process to come to the mayor and council. It's not to say that we wouldn't necessarily want to have the authority. It's a question of what the practical reality is. But we're going to have to, again, this is part of the discussion we really have to have with our legal team to.
I don't think if another proposal or application, council would be informed of that, right? I mean, I think that was the other thing that was in that PowerPoint.
We have typically informed council
Right.
when we're getting ready to approve applications. Again, if council chooses every application to come forward, that is council's choice.
Right.
We would have to modify how we actually do agendas and prepare for meetings, because typically we have, a 2.5 week lag time between when we place an item on the agenda. So we've already lost a significant amount of time in terms of actually trying to work through that process. It's not technically improbable. It's the question of what type of process would you like to see? Montgomery County, for instance, has a similar type process where they have a staff group that meets and makes changes based upon our approval of permits based upon the standards. In March, they approved 30 applications or reviewed 30 applications at the staff level.
But that's provided to the county council as staff correspondence then, right? It
Yes.
doesn't have to actually be on an agenda.
It would not be on the agenda,
And if
but
it's
there-
provided as correspondence to the council, then that's on the public record.
Yes, again, it's all about approaches. What is the resident's
And
right
that was what I meant.
to talk about, so.
But when it affects 200 or 600 homeowners financially and very possibly health-wise, how can you put a time limit on something? How can you put a stop clock on something when it could affect so many people with
Thank you,
That's
John.
actually the law.
That's why I
That's the
recommend you
problem.
contact your federal government officials who
Yeah.
have required
It's
this shot clock.
it's federal law that we're talking about. So, John, we're going to have to move on to the next
So, Mr.
speaker.
Mayor, should we
Thank you for your
guide
time.
Thank you.
staff on whether we want these things come to us or at staff level? Is that what
I'd like to ask if anyone would give up their 3 minutes.
No, we don't do that here. That's not part of it.
I would like
Thank
to
you.
ask if someone would like to read my questions.
You could just submit them.
Just
directly.
send them to us in writing. Who's the next speaker? Thanks.
Can I make a request? Is that allowed? Just a request?
You can make it in writing. Just either call us or email us. Thank you. Next speaker,
Well,
please.
you're really rude, I mean, to a citizen, who's directly.
Excuse me, we have a lot of speakers.
I'm just saying.
So am I. This is the way we run our meetings. Everyone gets 3 minutes. You had yours. We're going to let this gentleman have his. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carl Van Est. I live at 52 Red Ridge Drive in Gaithersburg. My neighbors have presented a lot of good arguments as to why we shouldn't do this, and I'm all for the health reasons. I'm all for the property value reasons. Those are all great reasons. I've already got a Comcast box out in front of my house. I've got a Fios box out in front of my house. Now I'm gonna have a 8-inch pole possibly out in front of my house. There's no end to this. I don't want a pole like this in front of my house. I got a lamp in front of my house too, that's fine, I like having the lamp out in front of my house, okay? But, I want things to be reasonable. I don't need to have a pole like this. Technology, some of my neighbors have mentioned, correctly, technology is changing very rapidly. Today's, 2.5 foot pole is tomorrow's 8-inch diameter pole, is tomorrow's, 4-inch pole, and it doesn't have to, the 4-inch pole, doesn't have to be 25 feet, it's suddenly 10 feet tall. Technology's changing. We don't need to be the guinea pigs for, the new technology being brought into our neighborhood. I think there are a lot of alternatives here. We had this wonderful talk earlier today, also about architecture and in the community. And suddenly, the first slide that we see is this hideous pole stuck in the middle of our neighborhood. And it seemed the juxtaposition of that with the talk that we had on the beautiful Old Town Park place, it just seems odd to me. Well, in any case, thank you very much. I appreciate your concern, and thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'll be very brief. I know it's late. My name is Joel Hoffman. I live at 9 Thorburn Road. I heard a lot tonight about fast tracking and getting ready for easements and taking applications because we've got a shot clock on us. What I haven't heard is, and what we all know, is that when Castle Rock or whoever comes in is going to say, we need to put a tower here. And let's say it's in front of one of my neighbor's homes. I don't think it'll be in front of mine, but who knows? The question is going to be, they're going to say, we need to put it here. And I heard some of the speeches saying we can't control whether it's at a stop sign or whether it's going to be a retrofitted light pole. They're going to say, we want to put it in a particular location. We all know that all of these commercial entities are going to want to do it for the least expensive way they can get it done. And if that means putting a pole in front of a neighbor's house versus retrofitting one of the light poles or doing it at an intersection, that's what they're going to try and do. My question is, and since it's a working session, I'd like to ask, how are we going to verify when they say that it can't work at one of these other locations? How are we going to verify before we approve one of these applications that in fact it doesn't have to be in front of a neighbor's house and it can be either retrofitted at a light pole or it can be at an intersection? Thank you.
Thank you. Dennis, do we have a preliminary answer? Do we want to get back on that one?
We would look at coverage and ask for them for an explanation. Again, one of the reasons to come up with the criteria on pole placement is if they deviate from that, they would need to come back before the council. So if they want to put it not at a property line division, which is what staff is recommending, or at an intersection, that would have to come back because, under our proposal, staff would not have the authority to approve that. So in those cases, it would be different. We are trying to streamline it. The council can have as many priorities as they want. They could actually limit the priorities to say if it doesn't come at an intersection, then they need to come back and discuss it with the council at the council level.
Does that stop the shot clock?
No.
It doesn't suspend it or anything else?
So
Not to my knowledge, no.
I would really like the answer on the right of way and whether it's proprietary or regulatory, because the case law is clear that the shot clock doesn't apply to proprietary. It only applies to regulatory. So I think we should look into that.
Okay, part of what we'll look into with our legal team. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Jim Rolfes. I live at 107 Manette Court in Wesley. I think a lot of the arguments, a lot of the issues that have been raised here are exactly right. Fundamentally, I don't think that we're being well served by our city government. It certainly appears from the conversations that we've had here today, a whole lot of bolstering for the rights of the vendor to come in and put this up, and not nearly enough arguing and not nearly enough fighting for the rights of the people who live in this area. We're, I think it's been said many different times, we're the consumers of this service and we don't want this service. The 76%, and I think it's going to increase the number of people who sign this thing. I think it's testament to the level of concern and distaste for this. It's affecting us aesthetically and financially. I think that's been made clear. I think that there have been so many questions that haven't been answered. The question about how we determined that this was the right place for this market, I think, is an important one. For this test market, I think is an important question. The gentleman before me mentioned that. I'm also particularly interested about what happens to the questions and the answers to the questions that have been made here tonight. So many people have asked, I think, many very good pointed questions. And I'll be very upset if the answers to those questions aren't made available to pretty much all of us. I think it's the idea of deferring this to staff to make decisions. Where's the accountability? And that's no disrespect to Dennis. He did a great job. He answered many of the questions and had a discussion with us before, and I think he's a congenial professional. But I think this needs to have a measure of accountability, and just letting it go, it really just isn't very satisfactory for me. And I think that the level of effort that personally I see on behalf of the council in supporting the homeowners in this
will be directly inverse to the amount of campaigning I do against the people who are on the council now. Okay, so basically, you don't work hard for this. In a couple of years, I'm going to be out there campaigning really hard against all of you. Thank you.
Dennis, to the question of how are we going to get answers to the questions out to the public, are we going to put out? You had mentioned before a project page on our website. How shall we do this?
We actually have, will be the easiest to get, because I don't have emails for everyone. I do have emails for some individuals that I've spoken to individually. We do have a project page. We've had the project page set up for quite some time in terms of prior to this meeting, 3 weeks before this meeting, and we're directing people to that project page. The presentation tonight was actually on that project page before it appeared even on your agenda project page. So that would be the easiest place for us to post those, because it's just so hard to get everybody's email address down, because I don't have all of those to do, and I don't want to miss somebody, so I could direct them to that project page, which is on our website.
Okay. All right. So we will put this out on the website. If
more people.
Yeah, no, I get that. If over the next week or two, or how long will it take us to turn around answers to a number of these? Say a week, 2 weeks?
To be honest, I have to go back through and compile all the questions.
Okay.
To make sure I have all the questions. So that's going to be reviewing this tape, and then trying to determine who answers which question. So some of them are legal questions. Some of them are more specific questions that I might be able to answer Ollie. So, I'd hate to give a definitive timeline. I'm going to have all the answers by, next Tuesday. That's probably not going to happen in reality, given other workload.
But we can start putting some out as they.
Yes,
as we
I can, and that's the intention of the project pages, is that we can update those as we go forward. In fact, we will have a little bit of comment about tonight's meeting up pretty early, and that we'll be putting forth questions and answering those questions. We might actually develop a frequently asked questions flyer that we can post on that page, which is easier to review than somebody reading all the questions.
Okay. Everybody here, anybody watching, anybody paying any attention at all is welcome to contact us at any time, and we will provide you with an update as to what's going on with the answers and we'll give you links to where to find them and answer them to the best of our abilities ourselves. Who's the next speaker? Please come on up. Okay.
I'm Michelle Arias. I live at 4 Thorburn Court. And after listening to Steve give such a wonderful representation of what he's going to do.
Can you pull the mic toward me?
For the park, what I'd like to have happen is, if we absolutely have to have these, that you make a wonderful statue out of it and put a fountain around it, and so that we can at least enjoy it. I'm trying to be at least a little bit funny here. I also have just a couple of questions, and I hate to be a little bit mean, but with all the questions we're asking, I'm kind of surprised that if this has been going on for a while, these discussions, that you have so many questions for Dennis. Just a little bit, that you haven't maybe been working together a little more closely. That's just something I was noticing. And then I have Mary's questions, which I'll repeat. She understands that Crown Castle is being paid fees for these poles to be put in, and we're wondering who's... I'm sorry, will be paying fees, who's being paid and how much, and that a commercial entity can actually say, you know what, we don't want these poles to be put in, and they can not be put in, or they say, yes, we'll go ahead and take the poles, and they get paid. And we're wondering where we might stand as private citizens, which I suspect is nowhere, but it would be nice to have some kind of information about what else we might be able to do.
Thank you. Dennis, do you want to speak to the financial aspect of these towers? These small cell facilities?
Again, that would be covered under the right-of-way agreement, and any right-of-way agreement we have that includes a franchise agreement has a provision that allows the city to charge 5% of the gross receipts for certain items. The thing to keep in mind is we have to be very consistent with right-of-way agreements. If we're not consistent, then somebody can come back and say, you didn't charge that person, so therefore I don't have to pay, Compass doesn't have to pay, or somebody else doesn't have to pay. So the city is very consistent about how we apply those across the board. There are also in the draft provisions for these particular facilities, if they're going to be co-locations, a fee associated with that. It's a pretty nominal fee. It talks about who would pay the electric and other things, because at that point, we're not really sure how the council is going to address co-locations on existing lights. Again, we're not recommending that for a number of reasons, because of, things that residents have brought up is, if the light goes out, who's responsible? How do we get it fixed? Our recommendation is that we not do those co-locations for those reasons and a number of other reasons. But that's really the gist in terms of the fees that are associated that the city would collect. Other than that, the city doesn't collect any other fees associated with these facilities.
Okay. And to the question about, to the observation that we're asking Dennis a lot of questions here this evening, this is the first presentation we've received. In our system of government, staff does the day-to-day work. We as the elected body set the priorities for the city, and so it's not. This is generally the way it works. Is staff, not just with this issue, but with many issues, staff will work on the issue, develop a record of information to present to us for us to study and make decisions on. So this is tonight our first presentation on this issue.
And I would add, Mr. Mayor, that having this conversation in public is part of the process, so that members of the public can hear what we're thinking and hear our questions and hear the answers. So that's part of it as well.
Please, come on up.
Hi, Mark Hochberg, 43 Reading Ridge Drive in Wesley. I just want to say thank you all for your time tonight, but with the exception of Mr. Wu, I don't think I've heard really any one of you folks say anything about what you're going to do to support us and fight for us. You've listened to all of us complain. You've listened to all of us talk about our concerns, but none of you, maybe Mr. Spiegel a little bit, but the rest of you haven't said a thing about what you're going to do for us to help us to try and support us. And it's very disappointing to me as elected officials that you've kind of remained silent in that regard. So I'm certain that you would not want this in your yard either. So.
Thank you for the comment. Let me just say, speaking for myself and not for my colleagues, because they're perfectly able to speak for themselves. At this point, I am gathering information. And what you have to say, it means a lot to me. And as I said before, I believe our next step is to huddle up with our legal team and figure out what the exact parameters are that we're working with. And before I get all that information, I need all that information in order to decide how to advise the city. That's where I am. So, anyone else want to speak to that?
I think that was an unfair statement. We're here tonight to gather information. We have the public here. This is what Gaithersburg does. We have public forums. We gathered a lot of information. I have a lot of questions I'm going to ask staff based on what you said tonight, because I am on your side. We are all on your side. We also have regulations facing us. How do we put the two together to do the best? You will find that every one of us here will do the best for our constituents. And we've talked about fighting battles and resisting things, but first we have to get the facts. And tonight was very, very enlightening. So I want to thank each and every one of you who spoke tonight. And I know I have a lot of questions. I have a different opinion than when I came here tonight. So I don't think that was quite fair, is that we did understand what you were saying. And we are on your side. But we also are on the side of the city. We also have to follow regulations. We have to put all those together, confer with our staff, confer with each other. And we will do the right thing for us, our constituents first. Thank you.
Anyone else? John,
I'm sorry, my buzzer never went off. So
John, you were out of time.
Right. My buzzer never went off. I was just wondering if you could quickly answer the question of, was the Kenlands and the Lakelands considered for towers as well as?
Okay, to answer that question, you'd have to ask the applicant. The applicant came to us with the pre-application
Okay.
We didn't initiate this, so thank you very much.
That's fair, I appreciate that, thank you.
Do we have anyone else who hasn't spoken yet this evening? Okay.
So let me also address the comments of the last speaker. I think we are in the information gathering mode. We are in a position where we have to be careful what we say from the dais, because that is part of the public record, and if it appears that we've already made a decision, then that could be a problem for us later in terms of anything else that would happen in case a denial happened or anything else. So that's why some of us, or most of us, I guess, if that's what your perception is. I think if you heard any of the comments and the questions that I raised, I think you could perceive that I don't look forward to the disruption of this in anybody's neighborhood, least of all mine. And if this happens in your neighborhood, it's going to happen. It's likely that this would happen in any neighborhood in the city. I think we've had some people comment on that as well. So we're in information gathering mode. We have to be careful what we say, and we're certainly balancing everything. We're taking in all of this information and understanding, certainly have a good appreciation for your concerns, both for your personal situation and the aesthetic, how it could possibly disrupt your community or change how you look at your own investments. So that's what I'm going to say at this point. So,
Ryan,
can I just ask staff to kind of lay out for the public? We've talked a little bit about the very next step, maybe huddling with our legal team, and obviously depending on how that discussion goes, that may change what the next steps after that are. But normally, what the next steps would be after this, if staff could sort of just paint a picture so that members of the public have an idea what comes next in terms of next public meetings and next opportunities for public comment and things like that.
I think after we have a discussion with legal staff, there would be one question about whether you want to have another work session on this particular topic, or if you want to move it directly to a council meeting. So we would need a little bit more direction on what avenue you want to take it. I think ultimately, in terms of what we were looking for, should the council develop some type of criteria for placement and design, that we would adopt that by resolution, which that would occur at a regular council meeting. So we would spell out, here's the criteria, here's how we would use it, and in what circumstances we would use it. We'd also need better direction if you're actually asking us to bring back every application. That process would look completely different than actually having a staff review process. So I need a little bit more feedback, and I think that would occur after talking with legal counsel. But there will be additional public meetings.
I think that's what I was getting at, is
Yeah.
that there will be additional public meetings before any final decision of any kind is made. And so there will be other opportunities for folks to speak on the record and come back and see what form of proposal the council may or may not be looking at adopting before that happens.
Correct.
And Mr. Mayor, if I could just clarify that any perception that I may be inflexible, I will consider every application from any provider that comes before me, and I will consider all of the information that's put before me, whether it be from the carrier or the community or the government or whatnot. I won't consider the environmental impacts of RF, but everything else that's been said here tonight is very helpful, and my opinion is based on my research and my understanding of the law, and I look forward to huddling, as I think we all do, huddling with legal counsel, figuring out the lay of the land before we take our next course of action.
So at this point, we don't actually, an application hasn't been made. The discussion is with Crown Castle about prototypes and designs, which we haven't actually decided on. So it seems like another work session to talk about those issues and perhaps to have an opportunity to hear from, I don't know, the applicant, where they could actually address some of these questions from the public.
Well, let's
But I think we'll have to wait for our legal counsel our city attorney to provide that position. So certainly another work session seems appropriate.
All right, well,
given everything
we'll see, and we'll certainly make public exactly what we're going to do. Tony, did you have anything else?
No, sir.
Lynn?
No.
Okay. I want to thank everyone who came out. We really appreciate your testimony. It is helpful. We do welcome your input on this issue and on other issues having to do with city business. Again, we do this every Monday night. Speaking of which, the next regular meeting of the Mayor and Council is next week, April 18th, Monday, 7:30 p.m. right here. We do have the State of the City event coming up on Thursday. And prior to the meeting, next Monday, we have our environmental awards. You all are welcome and invited to join us with each. Thank you all for being with us. Let's do great things, Gaithersburg. We are adjourned.